Hi, my name is Dominic Matthews and I'm the Product Development Ninja here at Ninja Theory. We've just announced our new game Hellblade, and through the course of making the game we want to share the development process with you. So I'll be showing you developer diary videos, we'll also be sharing concept art, assets, documentation, really as much as we possibly can. Melina here will be your eyes around the studio, so let's go and give you a taste of some of the things that we're going to be showing. A big part of the Hellblade project is sharing development and being open about how we make the game. So we wanted to announce the game early on in the development process so we could share the journey with you from the very beginning. Something we always do at Ninja Theory is create a previs trailer at the very beginning of development to define the art style, the mood and the tone of the game. As we move through development, then the vision can change a lot, as you'll see from these examples. These videos are never intended to be seen by the public, they're just used to pitch the game to publishers, but given that we are the publisher on Hellblade, there's no real reason to hold them back. We used to create these in CG, but these days we create them in engine. It's an opportunity for us to take concept art and try and realise it as in-game assets. So we can test whether a character will hold up, we can test whether we can recreate the atmosphere and mood of the art, and we can also test our ability to overcome any technical difficulties. It was also an opportunity to take the tech art experiment, the performance capture tech, and the character tech that we'd been prototyping to see if it held up. At the beginning of this trailer we had very limited resources. We didn't have any designers or animators, and we only had one programmer, and much of his time was being spent on another project. We didn't know when we were going to be staffing up the team, so we had to design the trailer around the art team that we had at the time. And this consisted of a concept artist, an environment artist, a character artist and an art director.
I proposed an idea that was just focusing on revealing Senua as a character and hinting at some of the themes that surround her story. When everyone in the room is shouting, jumping, screaming and shooting, that one way to stand out is to just stand still.
The idea was quickly sketched out by Mark, our senior concept artist, into storyboards, which Tamim then took and edited into a sequence. We needed a soundtrack for the trailer, and music licensing can be incredibly complicated and it can take months to get a contract signed. Luckily, in this case, we had a shortcut.
A few years ago I met Danny and Emily from a band called Passarella Death Squad, and we had remained friends ever since. They just recently released a gorgeous track called Just Like Sleep, and so I tried it out in the edit and it just felt really good, it felt right for it. Luckily they were very happy to help out. Knowing that we could use this track, I created a very rough edit that was timed to the music. So in Maya we could now block out the environments and the cameras and iterate very quickly in grey box form until we had precisely locked down what we wanted to see at every shot. As we started locking down the view, we would take screenshots and give it to Mark, our concept artist, who would overpaint these into full-blown illustrations. So now that we had the camera set and we had some great illustrations from Mark, we could go ahead and start dressing the scene in full 3D in Engine. Dan set about creating the in-game assets at this point in Unreal Engine. Where possible, we would use real-world reference if we could. So, for example, I brought in a kitchen knife that was made of hand-folded metal. Melina brought in a fox skull that she found on a dog walk. Claire ordered some leather and material samples over the internet for Senua's dress. And Craig brought in a potato sack.
So it was around this time that Sony got in touch and asked if we wanted to announce the game at Gamescom at their press conference. The only problem was that we'd been working to one deadline and their deadline was a week earlier. But this was such a great opportunity, we couldn't turn it down, so we went for it. At this early stage we didn't have an actress to play Senua, so Melina stepped in to take up the role. Her skin details, wrinkles and pores were captured in 3D using a device that Stu and Craig had developed in-house.
In Heavenly Sword, I believe that we were the first game to actually use performance capture, but it can take months to prepare for a shoot. The shoot itself takes weeks, it can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it can be months before you get the data back. Now in Hellblade we do want to push this tech forward again, but for the teaser in particular we wanted to do it on a tiny budget of a few £100 and in a matter of weeks. Stu and Craig worked together on a potential solution, but this was a very high-risk strategy. We didn't know if we could solve the problems and get usable data in the time we had for this teaser. So we shot all of the scenes using Melina, our video editor, as a placeholder actress, and we cut the video edit into the trailer and gave the time codes to Craig to see if he could extract the 3D data. But in this case time was too tight and it didn't pay off. But it's a project we want to return to in the future. Instead we had GTAC, a new animator, come on board, and he would rotoscope all of the scenes based on the video reference. The final step was grading, so Mark and Alex Tahaney, our company art director, overpainted a few of the frames to try and get the ideal lighting and color schemes for the trailer. These would then have to be replicated for the final trailer, both in-engine by setting up lights in 3D space and in post. We did make mistakes and we put in a lot of hours to get the trailer done. But to go from an idea to something we're incredibly proud of in 8 weeks and show it at the Sony press conference at Gamescom, it was fantastic.
About 3 months ago we started Hellblade with only a small art team in place. The game is set in the times of Vikings and Celts, so we decided to go to a Viking exhibition at the British Museum in London to try and gain some inspiration for the game.
You know, my feeling is like as soon as we walked in, it was just how much detail is in stuff. The brooches in particular, an insane amount of detail.
We were really surprised about the amount of gold, ornate gold they had. I didn't spend that. And I'm pretty sure we're gonna add some cool element on the concept when we go back.
What was really nice was that it wasn't just about looking at the objects, but it was about discussing them, trying to understand the culture behind them and coming up with new ideas.
One idea we had was that, you know, there'd be kind of sacrifices for going into these layers of kind of hell. You'd have to maybe make sacrifices of animals, and it would be more of a kind of spiritual thing where, you know, you're kind of like your body may go somewhere else, and that was backed up by, you know, some dialogue that was in there that talked about that as a very firm belief, so that was cool.
It was a great reference gathering trip. We saw lots of really interesting artifacts and were able to really immerse ourselves in the history of the time.
So after the trip, we started gathering additional reference, which every team member would put on Pinterest. These images contain ideas for characters, environments, costumes, and also art for that period. So with Hellblade, we do want to create a unique kind of vision, and so these images really just act as inspirational images. You know, the goal ultimately is to take that and kind of set out a unique art style. So even at such an early stage, the trip definitely kind of had an influence on the concepts that we're creating, and also the development of the teaser trailer. You can see in Senua's costume there's some elements that are coming through, and also a lot of the character concepts were definitely inspired by the trip.
We started with the simple Viking costumes and tried to transform them into the enemies, what we wanted. So we went through different stages of character development to get to the more crazy looking monsters.
Gathering reference is not art direction, but is really just the first step towards it. So in a future episode we'll be showing how we've taken that reference and we're shaping it into an art style to create a unique vision for Hellblade. One last thing, we currently have positions open on Hellblade and other projects for experienced, passionate and creative programmers. If you think that's you, visit ninjatheory.com for more details. Common wisdom in the games industry is that it's risky to have a female lead, as games with a female lead are harder to sell than those with a male lead. But given that Hellblade is an independent, self-published and self-funded game, we were only concerned with creating a character that's right for our story.
Several months ago I came across an article about a Celtic goddess that had just been discovered. They found a 1600-year-old shrine with various offerings inside, some of which read something like, "To the goddess Senua, we willingly fulfilled our vow." I loved the name Senua and I loved the mystery behind it. We would never know who she was, what her story was, but that's what sparked the idea.
Inspired by the article, Tamim came up with a new concept for a Viking and Celtic themed game and started to write down his first notes.
To create a character of intense realism, beauty, anger and history. A mystery that drives the action and story forward, revealing more and more seductive details as she descends deeper into a vision of hell. She is a challenging female form. Not sexy, not skimpy, not young, not skinny, yet stunning, compelling and believable.
With this brief, Alex started working up some concepts. Some were too game-like, some were too fantastical. But eventually, he arrived at two illustrations, a full body shot and a portrait that really captured the essence of the character.
In Celtic culture, women fought alongside men, often leading them into battle. And in northern Britain, a collection of Celts called the Picts, also known as the Painted People, were considered fierce barbarians by the Romans, who built an 80-mile-long wall from coast to coast called Hadrian's Wall just to keep them at bay. Senua is a Pict, and as the Pictish are tough people, it was important that she reflected that.
To realise Senua as a tough Celtic barbarian, we got Stu on board to join the team as art director.
So I took the concept art and tried to break it down into real-world references and expand on some areas in terms of their detail. She had to be kind of lean, but also have very pronounced kind of muscles. We wanted her to look like a hardened warrior type, full of scars and battle wounds. From here, Claire took it and the brief was to do kind of a 3D concept quite quickly, just stuck it in ZBrush and sculpt something up that we can iterate on quickly and move around and really get a feel for the character.
Stu started prototyping ideas on how to create organic materials in real time, such as fur, cloth and hair that can react to the wind and animation. These are all things that are very difficult to achieve in engine, but add greatly to the believability of the character. Both Craig and Stu also tried out a new face scanning method, using a member of the team. This was to create a more realistic looking character for the release of our Hellblade teaser trailer.
I used a process called photogrammetry to record Melina. Essentially, we take a lot of photographs from different angles and then reconstruct them to create a 3D model and a texture map. So I scanned in her pores and her wrinkles in 3D, and this gave us a really nice interaction with the lighting and made her skin feel much more lifelike and natural.
Scanning a real-world face and using it directly in the game can lead to the uncanny valley effect, where a face doesn't feel natural or believable in the context of the CG world. But it did give Stu an excellent base from which to sculpt Senua's unique face.
There are a lot of elements that make her feel believable, such as creating a good skin shader, reflections in the eye, so individually modelled eyelashes, sweat, mud, scars, cracks in the makeup and how it interacts with her skin. It's all about telling her story visually.
While doing research, I was fascinated by an island of Scotland called Orkney. It's a place of deep, deep mystery, but importantly, it's a place where the Vikings had invaded, and it is thought that they wiped out the native Pictish Celts that lived there. So I imagined Senua, fierce and battle-worn, fighting for survival against what must have seemed like a hellish race of giant Norsemen.
It's important to say that Senua's character is work in progress and will evolve throughout the project. Creating a good in-game model for use in the trailer is one thing, but getting her ready for the intense demands of gameplay is another. However, the feedback we've received so far has been encouraging, so that's something we'll take with us moving forward. On previous Ninja Theory games, we've had around 20 artists and designers working in partnership to create the game world. But given that Hellblade has such a small budget, our game world building team consists of just one person. With such limited resources but a steadfast commitment to quality, our approach to creating the world has to be radically different.
Viking lore is vast and richly detailed, and everyone's heard of Thor and Valhalla, but we were attracted to a different part of the Viking underworld, a place called the Land of Mist and Fog, in which sits the Hall of the Dead, Helheim.
The starting point for the game world on our previous titles has always been the script. Designers would plan the levels and the gameplay around the action and locations in the story. Artists would then model and texture the levels before cutscenes, animations, lighting and effects would be added afterwards. The standard way of doing things isn't going to work on Hellblade because our world building team consists of just Dan, our principal environment artist. Dan will create the world, and then the gameplay, design, story and art will have to fit around what he is able to create.
I wanted Dan to be able to start building the world without having to wait for gameplay systems like combat to become ready. So I suggested to him that what we should aim to do is to build a world so rich, interesting and haunting that a player could lose themselves for hours just exploring the world without having to rely on those kinds of gameplay systems.
We're not making a game where all you do is walk around for hours without any combat. But by saying that in theory it should be possible, Tamim has given the art team the power and the freedom to create a world without having to depend on gameplay designers.
For story reasons, we wanted to take the Viking symbol that we used in our teaser and incorporate it into the landscape. We researched a lot of Nordic terrain, but also a Greek island called Santorini, which is an active volcanic caldera. So I began exploring various aerial maps which use land and water as positive and negative space.
You could even have beaches and things on this side maybe.
So we picked one that had a good mix of natural and man-made elements. After refining it a little further, I passed it over to Dan, and he quickly just stamped it into the Unreal terrain so we could run around the area and get a feel for its size.
So to get a sense of realism into the map, we started looking at parts of the Nordic fjords, and from here, when we found areas that we liked, we took the satellite data and then brought that into Unreal and then used it with the terrain tool to make what you can see here.
The size and scale of the map was looking great, and now it was time to think about locations within it. We needed to explore the details, work out what it was themed on and the style of each area. So we pulled together a lot of reference on Pinterest and ultimately created a lot of style sheets which explored it in a lot more detail.
So the next thing to do was to scout around the locations. We knew that we wanted to have the central area to be the most prominent and viewable from everywhere. That way the player would be able to keep a sense of orientation. So we picked out some different areas, raised and lowered the mountains accordingly, and ended up with something like this.
The scale of the world is now comparable to our previous AAA games, but given that Dan is our only environment artist, we have to find a way for him to create lots of content.
We explored using kit parts and procedural systems on earlier projects like Razor. Now we want to take this forward onto Hellblade. So the ultimate goal is to have about 95% of our assets to be reusable. This Unreal demo is quite a good example of how you can get away with a very small amount of assets.
So I had an idea for the centre citadel, which was to theme it on a storm-battered Viking ship. I tried to find some rocks that had an indication of something that felt like the hull of a Viking ship, and so with a combination of the rock being carved into and getting a lot more pattern in there, it's going to feel very solid and grounded, but still give you the shape that we required.
In reality, Vikings were mostly farmers, and they didn't create the kind of big, huge structures and temples that we would want. But since the game is set in the mythical underworld of Helheim, this gives us artistic license to create something that's hugely oppressive, massive in scale, and something that feels daunting to the player as you approach and explore it.
We're at the very beginning of the prototype phase of the project. Development at this stage is highly experimental and focused on answering the questions that we don't yet know the answers to, such as how do we build a world to this scale but keep it diverse and interesting? How does the player move around in this world, and how open is the world? We'll be finding the answers to these questions over the next few weeks. We believe there is a third way to develop and release games, neither AAA nor indie, where games can take creative risks, can be made for a smaller audience, but still strive for AAA qualities. And this is what Hellblade is all about.
Many of the games that stand out for me aren't necessarily the really big ones. They're the ones that have something special or individual about them. It's games like Ico, or Abe's Odyssey, or Jet Set Radio. It's slightly unnerving to think that those games would probably never get greenlit in this day and age of go big, go home, big AAA blockbusters that have to sell 3 million to justify their existence.
It's only a few years ago that it would have been impossible to publish our own game onto console. But the openness of the platform holders and technology has meant that we can now release our games across the world without having to manufacture discs, put them into boxes and ship them out to retailers. It's digital distribution that means that we can now release a game without having to charge $60.
Hellblade is the first game we're doing under this independent AAA model. It's not a game that's attempting to be all things to all people, rather it's about what we feel passionate about, what we're good at, and what we think our fans and supporters want from us in a game. But it comes at a price. We have to self-fund this game, and we have to work within the restrictions that means for us.
The Hellblade team currently consists of 13 people, and in most discipline areas we only have one person. But by keeping the team small and the costs low, it means that we only need to sell 200 or 300,000 copies of the game in order to make the development budget back.
Hellblade isn't about world domination, it's about pushing ourselves creatively to make the kinds of games we feel strongly about, hopefully to find an audience that want to play our games. And if in the process we can earn a good living from it, then we'll have hit the sweet spot. We've created a model that might work.
We're taking our work on Hellblade as an opportunity to question the way that the games industry have always done things, to see if there's a better way, a more streamlined way, to create amazing quality but on a smaller budget.
And when budget is your constraint, you can't just throw people and money at a problem. You have to find new ways of working. If you can't afford particular devices or equipment, you have to invent your own. And this is exciting. It's a model that forces you to take creative risks.
One of the keys to Hellblade is finding partners that are really excited about what we're doing and want to help us prove that this model works. Over the past few months, we've been reaching out to performers, musicians and technology owners that want to collaborate with us on the game. The enthusiasm for Hellblade has been fantastic, and we can't wait to share with you some of the partners that we've got on board.
Performance capture has traditionally been thought of as a very difficult, expensive process, even by big AAA studios. So we want to show in Hellblade that you can do it on a much, much smaller budget, that you can do it using a mixture of existing and homebrew equipment and achieve results that are up there with the best.
So we reached out to Vicon to see if we could work together to find a solution that would enable us to shoot performance capture but make it work within Hellblade's budget. We're working on techniques and technologies to find a solution. We want to share as much of the development process as possible, and we're taking this as an opportunity to create a range of merchandise for the fans that want to support our project. All of the profits that we make from this will go back into the development budget to make the game as good as possible. So if you're interested, please do get in touch and let us know the types of merchandise that you'd like. but we also want to help nurture the next generation of developers. So we're working with Epic Games to launch a series of online masterclasses aimed at university students and hobbyists. We'll be posting regular tutorials and offering feedback to people who want to try out the work at home or as part of their course.
Ultimately, we want there to be a future for mid-sized developers like us, and the best way for us to do that or contribute towards that is to share how we're doing Hellblade, in the hope that it can be replicated or variants of it can exist thereof, but mainly to show that there is a space here that we can all be part of.
We're sharing Hellblade's development with you, but your role doesn't end there. We want to get you involved in QA testing, play testing and giving us feedback. We believe that by sharing the game with you early, we can ultimately make a better game. There are three main pillars on which we build our games: controls, camera and character actions. And these will define how the game will look, feel and play, and are the first areas to prototype in Hellblade. Choosing a camera view was one of the first decisions to be made on Hellblade. We're making a third-person action game, but even so, the type of camera can have a massive impact on the gameplay and the controls.
In Heavenly Sword, we had cameras on rails which were painstakingly mapped into the levels by designers, and it is a system that won't really work for the more open world that we are building. In DMC, we used a free-roaming camera, but it was still intelligent enough to behave well in most instances without player input. It took the coder the best part of 2 years to implement this system, and it's a luxury we simply cannot afford for Hellblade.
Our world in Hellblade is more open than in previous games, and our team is small. So we can't afford to create a camera system that is heavily reliant on coders and designers. We need a camera that is cinematic, easy to implement, and gives the player complete control.
We settled on a third-person over-the-shoulder camera, and it's not something we've tried on other games, but it's straightforward to implement from a code point of view. It's easy to set up from the design point of view, and being so close to the character minimizes collision issues, which is always a big problem.
The control system is defined by the camera system, and this viewpoint has a lot more in common with a third-person shooter, where you have the left stick for moving forward, backwards and strafing, and right stick for turning. There actually are very few melee games that use this kind of control system and camera view, but so far it seems to work well in Hellblade.
For combat, the view would need to frame both Senua and the enemy very clearly. And to do this, we would have a lock-on button, which when pressed, would both pull out so that we can see Senua clearly, and zoom in so that we can see the enemy nice and big on screen. And then once locked on, you'd be able to strafe around the enemy very easily. With this working, the next step was to try out different numbers of enemies and different sizes of enemies to see if the view could cope, to see how the controls would feel, and to explore how lock-on targeting would work in these instances.
You may have noticed that our animations at this stage look very basic. In the prototyping phase, we create bare-bones placeholder animations that can be churned out and changed quickly as prototyping progresses. This allows us to iterate on gameplay to make it feel good before we focusing on making it look good.
To find the right look for the combat animations, we always do a thing called style tests on all of our games, so it's no different for Hellblade. And in this style test, I really wanted to capture the essence of Senua, that she should feel grounded, that there should be an anger that drives her attacks, that there's a wildness about her, but also a sense of discipline that she's achieved through years of training.
Happy with the results, the next step is to cut this up into usable animations, to get them into the game to make sure we're hitting all of the right notes in terms of control and responsiveness, whilst at the same time maintaining the visual style. So while we're using Unreal Engine 4 out of the box for the most part, combat is one area where the investment in iteration is required. Mel, one of our coders, is implementing our combat engine to do just that.
The battle engine will allow us to visually create a combat system. It allows us to link together animations, reactions, pad inputs, data, and all other things like visual and sound effects.
The Hellblade combat system is likely to involve hundreds of animations, sound effects, visual effects, and driving these are thousands of parameters that a designer will have to tweak over and over the course of the project. So the ability to iterate rapidly and often is what will determine the quality, the precision and the responsiveness of Hellblade's combat.
The system runs in real time, so the combat system can be developed live while the game is running. It's a system that will eventually allow designers and animators to create and expand the combat system without any code involvement.
At its core, Hellblade will have a hardcore battle system, one that is entirely skill-based and one that the big AAA studios tend to shy away from in the pursuit of mass appeal. Just like one-on-one fighting games, the controls should be dead simple, lightning fast, but there should be endless nuance in the way you play the game.
On top of all of that, there's still room left for something that we call special sauce, something that sets the combat gameplay apart from anything else that exists. This is based on the themes that underpin the story and Senua's character, and we've already started to previs the ideas for this, which we'll be sharing in future episodes. Being open in our development means giving journalists unprecedented access to our development and the team. It was this approach that led to a very special opportunity. Back in September, official PlayStation magazine got in touch to see if it would be possible to come and talk about Hellblade. We saw this as an opportunity to see how being totally open with the press would work.
So it was at Gamescom this year when I realised that we had to feature Hellblade in official PlayStation magazine. This was a chance to see a title right at the beginning and to tell a story for our readers about how a game comes together from a blank page.
I introduced Matt to the team and let him talk to anyone and see anything that we'd been developing. Nothing was out of bounds.
So before I travelled over to Ninja Theory, I was expecting to write maybe a 2-page news story on the game, but as the hours ticked by and I saw more of the game, spoke with more of the team, it became quite evident that we needed to go bigger. That by the time I walked out of those doors, I knew it was going to be a feature and quite possibly our subscriber cover game as well.
Being the featured game on a magazine cover is a very special achievement, not just because your game will jump out at each and every reader, but also because it shows real faith in your game from the editor.
It's really quite rare that you get an all-access pass to a game this early on. I had pages and pages of notes, I had about 4 hours of interview content. It became very clear that the only way that we could handle this for the magazine is to not impose any restrictions on what we were going to write. We had to just write what we had, tell the story, and then worry about how it was going to fit into the magazine afterwards. So after 2 solid days of writing, we ended up with a 12-page feature. Now at this point, we already knew that we wanted it to be a subscriber cover, but we thought what would make it extra special is if we approached Ninja Theory to design us some bespoke artwork that only our subs would get.
It was great to hear the news from Matt, and we started work on the cover art straight away.
When we were looking for ideas for the cover art, we were looking at what made Senua such an iconic character. We were looking at how striking she was, the face paint, her hair. We tried to get the hair kind of to frame the image, and obviously the use of the sword.
So the first step for us was to gather some reference images for the pose and the composition of the shot. The sketch they provided us was a good start, but we felt that we could explore it further. It was really a case of now which kind of personality of Senua and which tone do we want to sell within the cover. Something that feels kind of evocative but deadly in the composition, but also the fact that the back is to the viewer, so it's a bit more mysterious.
There were many strong options to choose from, and we chose the one that captured her nature the best. It showed her as being wild and aggressive, whilst maintaining her insular nature.
Ever since our 100th issue, we've been making different covers just for our subscribers, but what makes this issue even more special is that it's the first time we've had artwork created specifically and exclusively for those subs.
With the composition decided upon, it was up to Stu to match the pose of the mock-up in Maya.
So armed with the kind of mock-up reference image in the 3D scene, we were able to set up a camera that kind of had the composition of the cover, and then it was a case of basically adjusting Senua's posture until we felt comfortable that the pose was good and it was giving us everything that we wanted. And so the next phase is getting that into the game engine and doing some renders that are fully lit and look amazing.
With the right pose, the next step was for Mark to paint over the render for the final piece.
So up until this point, the conversation had only been about the subscriber cover. We actually had something else lined up for our main cover, but just to satisfy my curiosity, I asked our art editor to drop the key art for Hellblade onto the wallet, and the moment that he did that, I think we all looked at each other and realised that this had to be the way forward. Hellblade was not just going to be our subs cover, but our main cover as well.
When Matt told us that Hellblade was going to be the cover for both editions of the magazine, we were absolutely thrilled. To have a cover feature this early on in development is almost unheard of. It's great to see our work displayed so prominently, and also suggests that our open approach to development is being noticed by the fans, but also by the press. If we were to make Hellblade using standard AAA methods with our team of just 13 people, we'd be lucky to have any more than an hour of gameplay. So over the past few months we've been in our prototyping phase, where we've been exploring new ideas and new ways of working.
It's not enough for us to just make a smaller version of what we've done before. We're not competing on scale, therefore we have to compete on being different. Hellblade has to be something unique, something that you wouldn't be getting in a big budget AAA experience, so our approach to making the game has to be different too. The approach Dan took was to build the world out of kit parts, a little bit like Lego. The theory was that with the right building part sections, the right materials and the right props, you could populate large areas of the world very quickly and easily while maintaining the quality. Dan started by building a series of props in ZBrush, Maya and Photoshop. Props that could be scaled, deformed, repositioned and reused throughout the environment. Dan also created some scripts using Unreal's blueprint system so that you could position props in any environment and they would very naturally blend in. He took a multi-layered approach to texturing where he would combine hand-drawn textures with photographs, material shaders and also model geometry. This allowed him to create and reuse textures across large areas of the environment with no loss of detail and no repeating patterns. Bringing it all together, we picked a couple of areas for him to push his technique up to its full potential to see what kind of level of quality and detail we could achieve.
Thanks to the approach that Dan has taken, what seemed like a near impossible challenge, creating a AAA quality environment at a large scale with only one artist, now seems feasible.
The approach on enemies was to simplify the problem. Traditionally, when we built a character, every character would have their own animation rig, their own accessories and textures that are unique to that character. For Hellblade, the enemies will be humanoid and part of a unified Viking clan. To work out whether these constraints would allow us to create interesting enemies, we did some brainstorming on paper. Mark explored with a human frame how much variation he could achieve in the silhouettes of the characters. Claire also sketched out some ideas in 3D to explore different accessories and different silhouettes such as hat shapes and armor, etc. Taking this forward, Claire then modeled and textured a single in-game enemy character. From this one character, she was able to create multiple variations within the space of a week, simply by changing the shape, the accessories and the colors of the character.
Our prototypes show that it's possible for one artist to create a wide variety of enemies within our constraints. With this in mind, we'll move forward and design our full set of enemies in confidence.
Mel started working on a battle engine that would allow Alexander and G-Tech to start building the combat system out. We started by making a single attack look and feel bit to set the start. From there we expanded outwards into fast attacks, heavy attacks, charge attacks, blocking, reactions, evades, all of the staples really. The camera view we chose allowed for the concept of directional attacks, which in turn opened up directional blocking and evading. Combat is a vast multi-layered beast, but at its core, at its base layer, it needs to be fast, responsive, tactical and nuanced.
we're now actively testing the game internally. And once we've refined this, we'll be beta testing it with some of you out there. It's one of the exciting ways that we think you can help us in the development of Hellblade.
Senua sees and experiences the world very differently from most people. It's part of what makes her unique. So we set about exploring how we could alter spatial and temporal perception for the player. For combat, we used previs in Maya to explore some of our more outlandish or strange ideas involving perception. Some of these ideas played tricks with time. There was an idea for having alter egos, and there were various other strange ideas, all based on focus and perception, that we explored. And it wasn't just in combat that we were interested in this idea of altered perceptions. So in the world itself, we also explored various optical illusions based on spatial positioning, perspective, mixing the senses of time, space and geometry in various different ways. It's something that we feel could lead us somewhere special, and we're actively exploring going forward.
Forcing the team size to stay small, far from crippling development, has encouraged each of us to throw out old habits, to think differently, and to explore new ways of working and creative problem solving. The challenges ahead remain overwhelming, and there are many unknowns, but we've been really encouraged by our approach so far. Music is often commissioned for a game very late in production, once the gameplay and the story have been fully set. In the case of Hellblade, we wanted to take a very different approach, and for music to be part of the creative process from the very beginning.
I imagined two different styles of music, one for Senua and one for the Vikings, perhaps even by different composers. And I was pretty sure I knew exactly who could do the Viking side of things.
You're waiting for change, thousand complaints. You never listen to me. It's always the strength that set me free.
His music is very aggressive, tribal, dark, and contemporary. And he's from Norway, which is the land of the Vikings.
While still in the concepting phase of the project, we got in touch with Andy LaPlaga from Combichrist, who we've worked with previously, to see if he'd be interested in working on Hellblade.
It was quite interesting. We set up a Skype meeting, we were talking about everything, and it was great to be able to get into the game so early, so you can set a pace and help the creative process of the game. And now I'm here.
Andy was on tour at the time, and given that he was going to be in London, Tamim took the opportunity to meet with him to go through the concept and to talk music direction.
Initially, they want me to do just the battle scenes, the Viking side. But I was more interested in actually doing everything, because you could make it seamless and like one soundtrack for the whole game.
We let Andy explore as much as he wanted for the first 4 weeks without any further direction. Tamim flew out to Andy's studio in Atlanta for a few days to help steer him for the next few weeks.
On the first day, I listened to everything that Andy had produced for Hellblade so far. And it didn't need much more direction from me. The music was diverse, it was exciting. A lot of it was unexpected, but it all seemed to fit in extremely well.
I don't think they really knew what I was going to do, and I really just wanted to have free hands to explore on this. Still one of the most interesting and hardest things I've done so far, because you really have to be inventive and go into areas I've never been before, which is obviously a great opportunity as an artist.
I wanted Andy to have a very clear picture of the storyline we had so far, so the next day I took him through the characters, the key plot events, the way I imagined the game would unfold.
We had all the bits and pieces of stories, and it was really helpful when I could really place that on, just on a whiteboard, and really fit the different tracks into the different areas, and that way I had a wider view on what was missing, what we need more of, where we can push it even further, and where we can pull it back.
The Viking side of things was to have a cultish, warlike, tribal feel to it, and I encouraged Andy to use his knowledge of the Norwegian language in the Viking songs.
Being Norwegian, I can at least use my language and trying to get more into the Norse to create that Viking era feel to it. To the Viking side of things, we wanted to make it a little alien to Senua, something that really doesn't fit into her world. So we've been experimenting with different things, so everything from vocal pops and different types of mellow and recording organic sounds. I think that's where a lot of the very dark side of me came out. We're using guitar quite a lot, but it's quite interesting what you can actually do in an instrument when you look at an instrument and you try to figure out how can I use this and not make it sound like what it's made for.
The Senua side of things was to have a completely different feel to the Viking side, and I didn't know what to expect from Andy on this front, but I was more than happy for him to experiment.
I was writing a song for Senua, or for Senua's mother. The first thing that hit me was a nursery rhyme, like a lullaby from when I was a kid myself. My mom would always sing to me, so it's quite surprisingly, I haven't really heard that song since I was probably 5, but it came back to me pretty fast when we try to set yourself in that situation. When I approached Senua's side, I wanted to do a little bit more folky and more familiar when you think of her character.
All we're lost and fall for dying. The lost is mine. Lost in
To be a part of the creative team and not just, be hired to do music is amazing, because you get to be involved with the whole progress of the game. And I think that certain things that I do with this can shape the storyline somewhat of the game as well. Maybe opening new doors that none of us knew that even was possible.
no one to hear me sing my song. No one to hear it right from wrong. I started lost for what I've done. If only follow what I lost, I love the most.
Andy will continue working on Hellblade at key stages of production, and soon we'll be sharing one of Andy's tracks on hellblade.com. Hellblade will follow Senua's dark and harrowing journey into a hellish underworld. She needs to feel real, nuanced, complex, and believable. For cutscenes in a typical AAA game, a voice artist delivers the dialogue, another actor performs the body motion, and animators hand key the face and cameras. It can take a team of 30 or 40 artists to stitch together all of the cutscenes in this way. Our entire team on Hellblade is 13 people, yet we still believe that there is a way to shoot and produce high quality cutscenes on a budget.
Ever since we shot Heavenly Sword 10 years ago at Weta Digital, we've always captured face, body and voice simultaneously, and that's what we call performance capture.
Noriko, we have to get out of here! Ah! Noriko, help me!
Leave her alone!
Heavenly Sword was the first game to use performance capture, yet it's still rarely used in games today. The perception is that it's too difficult and too expensive for most games, even in the AAA bracket.
We don't have the budget to shoot cutscenes in a performance capture studio like we have done in our previous games, so instead we started prototyping homebrew hardware and software solutions to see if we could find another way. Our first prototype rig consisted of several GoPro cameras with different lenses, so pairs of cameras would capture the face in 3D, the body, and also pick up on visual markers around the room. And the idea was that you'd be able to capture face, body, and even the camera position anywhere in 3D space without having to have a purpose-built studio.
The device was giving us data, but it soon became clear that we needed more time and more resources than we had available to make it robust enough for commercial use.
So we contacted our friends at Vicon, who are leading players in high-end motion capture solutions, to see if they could help us out within our limitations on Hellblade.
Thankfully, Vicon were able to find a solution that worked within our constraints. They sent us 12 of their Bonita cameras and a Blade server to drive them.
We don't have space in our studio for shooting, so we cleared out our largest meeting room, and to mount the Bonita cameras, we bought some cheap wardrobe posts from IKEA, which did the job nicely. We did some tests, and the body data we got back were easily as good as anything we've ever captured before. So we moved on to our next challenge, which is how do you capture the face?
As facial performance is captured with video, we needed good even lighting in the room. Studio lights are very expensive, but we found an alternative solution, cheap LED lights that we bought from Amazon.
Now we had good even lighting, we could capture the face using video. And to do this, we had previously created a prototype using a cricket helmet, some umbrella wire and a webcam. Using the cricket helmet, we could capture facial expressions, and then we started developing our own facial solver. The facial solver is needed to interpret the video feed into real-time 3D facial expressions.
I want each person here to give George their report by Thursday afternoon. Stop laughing, Stuart. You fucking molly.
For the shoot proper, we would need a much more robust solution than the cricket helmet. So for that, Vicon kindly lent us their high-end Kara head rig, which consists of 4 cameras, which allows you to capture the full 3D facial expression of the actor.
Despite good results, we're still looking for even more cost-effective solutions, including 3D printing our own helmet.
So now we knew we could capture the face, but you still need to convert that video feed into a believable real-time digital double. And to create a digital double, we used a technique called photogrammetry, which is able to construct a 3D face from a series of photographs. But instead of just using still photographs, we used GoPro cameras, and that way we could capture the full range of expressions as they happen. And to capture even finer levels of detail, such as skin pores and wrinkles, we created another prototype device called the plant pot. And it's called a plant pot because it's actually housed within a plant pot casing. And inside we've set up some LED lights, and it's controlled with a Raspberry Pi and some custom code. So the idea is that you could put this onto any surface, and by triggering the lights you can capture still photographs with different lighting conditions. And from that you can create a very high-res normal map which captures very precise details. So now we had a solution for both the face and the body, but we also wanted to capture the camera itself, which is very much a part of visual storytelling. And to do that, we built a further rig. On it we attached a GoPro camera, a portable LCD screen, and put markers on the rig so that every nuance of the camera could be captured on set in the scene.
Finally, to capture audio, we rented a wireless recording system. Our room isn't soundproof, but even so, we were pleasantly surprised with the result. It meant that we wouldn't have to record audio separately.
But we're still pushing other areas and other types of performance capture. These are highly experimental and may or may not produce results.
With just a few £1,000s, we now had a setup in the studio that would allow us to capture a full performance: face, body, voice and cameras.
We also hope to show that a small team with limited means is still able to capture high-end character performances, and this is something that up until now has only been the preserve of big-budget AAA studios. So to fully test our setup and see if all the pieces of the puzzle come together, we conducted a test shoot, and we're still putting this together, and it's something that we hope to show you soon.
Shh. Someone's here.
We are now approaching the most important phase of development so far, where we'll define how Hellblade will look, feel and play. The goal is to create a small section of the game, about 10 to 15 minutes in length, to a near finished standard. This is what we call a vertical slice, and it's something that we've done for all of our games, but this time the stakes are higher.
The independent AAA model is an experiment to see if we can do a AAA quality game, but with an indie-sized team and budget. And the vertical slice was going to be a crucial test for this model.
So far we've worked out new ways of working for every part of the game. We had a test scene we shot in our capture studio, the basics of our combat engine up and running. We had an idea of how to build the world in Helheim, some music recorded by Andy LaPlaga, and an approach for creating enemies. Making them all work together in gameplay would be a major challenge.
Dan started working on a new type of environment, a forest, set in the outskirts of Helheim. Balázs took the test scene that we shot in our last dev diary and placed it within this setting. And to fill out some of the story elements, we turned to Side UK in London. They helped us cast actors and record some dialogues for use in the vertical slice.
Feel your way towards the source.
With that, we started introducing some non-combat based gameplay into the level, based on our ideas for story and altered perception. We had a new character design which we modelled and textured and animated, and in tandem the coders and gameplay team were working on the AI systems to make sure that he's fun to play against.
After 10 weeks of work we had a level in place that could be played from start to finish, but this is just the beginning of the process.
It's very difficult to judge your own work. You're too close to the project, so we're too biased to know whether what we create is going to work for other players.
We have a small room set up in the studio equipped with a mic and a camera. A couple of people from another team were invited to play the game, while the Hellblade team sat in another room and watched.
The session didn't go smooth. In fact, it was best described as a disaster. The combat was really messy and unclear in the new setting, and the AI was really frustrating for players. The level was described as too small, too linear, too awkward to navigate, and yet despite this, people were still getting lost. Senua herself felt very flat and unconnected with the world, just not believable.
The team were despondent as the reality of the session hit home. We'd failed to create the experience that we'd been looking for.
But you have to start at rock bottom before you can even attempt to reach for the top. In my experience, it usually takes about 3 goes to make something work and 5 to make it good.
The team gathered and made notes on issues and improvements that we wanted to make. We made a big list and got back to work.
To fix the layout problems, we made the level a lot less linear, expanded it, opened it up, and dressed it so it helped guide the player without them really being aware of it. Jeff, our new character artist, joined at this point, and he started by creating a new enemy variant to add more diversity to the combat. To make Senua feel more believable, we added a system of partial animation so that she could physically react and portray the mood that she's in. To make the combat feel very clear to the player, we animated all of the enemy attacks from scratch, and we also gave different visual and sound effects for every single type of attack in the game. 4 weeks later, we were pretty confident that we'd addressed most of the issues, so we ran another playtest. As we watched the playtest session, the game pretty quickly unraveled before our eyes. Now, it wasn't as bad as the last time, so at least we knew we were going in the right direction. But it was clear we still had a lot of work to do.
Sony at this point invited us to get the game into the hands of journalists at a pre-E3 event called Judges Day. The deadline for this meant that we only had 2 weeks to get the vertical slice into shape.
And so we created another massive list, but with only 2 weeks left, it was looking pretty tight at this point.
The initial vertical slice took 10 weeks to put together. The second pass took 4 weeks, and the third, 2 weeks.
What we've learned creating a vertical slice has given us confidence to face the next set of challenges in development. That's what the true value of the vertical slice is. It's not really necessarily the end result, but it is the setbacks, learning through repeated failure to find the heart of what you're searching for.
The final playtest of the vertical slice will be in the hands of the journalists at Judges Day. We'll be presenting the game behind closed doors, and we'll find out if our work has paid off. Regardless, we'll be sharing the highlights of the vertical slice before E3. Hellblade is an independent game, and this allows us to tackle challenging subjects. From the very beginning, the subject of mental illness has been at the heart of Hellblade, and we've been exploring the facets of this in our first playable demo.
Senua suffers from anxiety, depression, delusions and hallucinations. She has a condition that's been called cancer of the mind, a living hell, and we're going to witness her journey through her mind's eye.
To achieve this, we reached out to Professor Paul Fletcher, who is a psychiatrist and Professor of Health Neuroscience at Cambridge University, who agreed to consult on the project.
So I've been interested in severe mental illness for quite a long time, and I've been very struck by how under such conditions a person can become very isolated and ostracized, and a consequence of this is that they can become very stigmatized.
I'm not turning back. It took months to get here. Well, maybe, but I made my promise.
You will die.
We'll all die someday.
It's getting dark.
I'll continue tomorrow.
You're afraid of the dark.
I'm being patient.
Getting closer to him.
For me, it was really exciting to see something that I explore scientifically being represented so beautifully in a character who's trying to penetrate the mysteries of the environment in which they've been placed, with all of this strange uncertainty and noise and conflicting information that they're getting. I think it's been very gratifying to work with the team at Ninja Theory and to see just how serious they are about trying to provide a representation and a reflection of these sorts of symptoms that is sensitive and empathic, and I think it's very important that that's the case.
Much of this research has been made possible by the support of Wellcome Trust, a charitable foundation dedicated to research and the understanding of health.
Mental health hasn't always been presented in the media in a way that is particularly helpful. It can be challenging to engage people with the subject matter, and there are a lot of preconceived ideas about mental health, and particularly schizophrenia and psychosis. So we hope our support allows the team to continue to collaborate with Paul Fletcher and with those who have experience of psychosis to create a game that provides a fresh perspective on the condition and allows audiences to engage with it in a way that just wouldn't be possible in any other medium.
At the heart of this game is Senua's story, and we don't want her to be a helpless victim. She's an accomplished warrior who's been traumatized by a very violent past.
You must let your quest fully consume you. There is little room for anything else.
I've often been struck by the sense that I get talking to people with psychosis that they do feel themselves on a quest. I mean, it may be a figurative one in which they're simply searching for meaning to explain all the new and unpleasant experiences. And in some cases, people actually experience a genuine physical quest. They're looking for someone or something or some answer, some place. And with the feeling that if they can only achieve that, then there will be a release or a resolution to all of the things that are plaguing them.
Much of the game involves exploration, but we wanted to avoid the usual collectibles and pickups you see in most games because we felt it would break the immersion and take away from Senua's point of view. A lot of the game involves finding patterns and illusions in the environments that trigger memories, sometimes haunting memories, that progress you further into Helheim, but also take you deeper into Senua's own mind.
The gods can see into your mind. They will use this power against you.
And one of the very striking things that we found recently is that people with psychosis or prone to experiencing psychotic symptoms may actually be remarkably good at that. Maybe that under some circumstances they're actually capable of using their prior knowledge to really enhance the way in which they see patterns and put things together.
We now have a good idea of how these illusions can be incorporated into the game based on the playable demo. We'll now take these ideas much further as we build out the rest of the game.
There are several characters that accompany Senua on this journey, and they take the form of voices in her head. And they are manifestations of her own inner voices, but to her they appear real.
Let it pass through. Remember his words.
Find the light, the light is just straight behind it.
Open your eyes.
These voices can be in many different forms. They can be talking to the person, they can be talking about the person, they can be very critical and unpleasant and persecutory. Sometimes they might be kind, they might offer advice. Some people are utterly tortured by these experiences. They want to get away from them, they're getting them 24 hours a day, whereas other people might begin to find ways of living with the voices. They may even begin to trust them and to listen to what they're saying.
The darkness. It gathers in the wind. It's getting stronger.
Each one has a unique character, agenda and personality. Through them and through body language, you could get a very clear picture of what's going on in her mind. And this indirect approach lets you embody her more fully rather than think of her as a separate video game character.
You're just like your mother. Losing yourself to the abyss of fear.
A question we're often asked is how much of what Senua sees is real?
We like to think that we experience the world almost like a high-definition photograph, as it really is, but actually a lot of the time what we're doing is using what we already know to shape and govern what we perceive.
Senua, come closer. Do you hear that?
Psychosis can't really easily be understood as just some malfunction of the mind. It's actually a very creative process where somebody constructs a world. And if we recognize that that's what we're doing all the time anyway, constructing our own reality, it may help us to understand.
They were calling for me.
And as the quest takes Senua further into Helheim, it also takes us deeper into her psyche, her memories, her emotions, and we want to find ways to manifest this physically so that the world around you transforms into this waking dream landscape.
When it comes to combat, the violence experienced is not a result of Senua's mental illness. The trauma and violence of Senua's past has resulted in her condition, not the other way around.
This darkness and fear that Senua constantly battles is inextricably tied to the trauma of the Viking invasion. The Vikings are real, they're a real threat to her that she must battle with, but to her, through her eyes, they seem exaggerated, hellish, monstrous, oversized, surrounded by darkness. We want to build on the combat by incorporating the ideas of altered perception of time and space, so that she can more effectively overcome the enemies, even incorporating some of the voices in her head as manifestations that can appear and disappear to give you a much broader set of attacks. Now we've built this first playable, we have a really good foundation, and it's crystallized a lot of our ideas for representing her world through her eyes. And we feel like we can take it a lot further from here, because behind her condition is a process of imagination and creativity, and this is what makes her an extraordinary character.
Everything you've seen is early code, shown much earlier in production than most games would be shown. And this is because we want to share our development journey with you as we expand and build the world of Hellblade. We'd like to thank Professor Paul Fletcher and Wellcome Trust for their continued support.
Right, so this is where I do most of my story work. There's a lot of things going on in this room, and it would have been a very difficult thing to actually just sit down with a blank piece of paper and just start writing a story. It's only by visualizing everything in a physical space that it starts to slowly make sense and coalesce.
Combat. Unlike our previous titles, Hellblade is not a linear game, so creating a story required a different approach from us.
Games don't need stories to be entertaining, so if you're going to do a story-driven game, then you have to ask yourself, why is this story worth telling? Why does it deserve to exist? I've always been interested in how the mind works, and I was reading about people's experiences with severe psychotic mental illness, and I was really horrified by what I was reading and video representations of what it can be like for some people.
No, don't open it.
He has to open the box.
This is entirely your fault.
Don't eat it. Don't eat it. Poison. Poison.
I started to think about the role video games could have in representing that, and it occurred to me that in games you embody a character and you see things visually and orally, and you're involved in navigating worlds and decision making, and actually this is a profoundly good medium for representing those kinds of experiences, at least attempting to represent those kinds of experiences.
You will die then.
We'll all die someday.
Set in dark.
I'll continue tomorrow.
You're afraid of the dark.
I'm being patient.
Getting closer to him.
I hope so.
For me personally, when I start developing a story, I start with research, a lot of research, and speaking to experts. So in this case, we got in touch with Paul Fletcher, who's a psychiatrist and professor of health neuroscience at Cambridge University. It's very important to get both a scientific understanding of the subject and also a very personal and human understanding of the subject.
A big helping hand came from Wellcome Trust, who are a global charitable foundation dedicated in part to broadening the understanding of science.
One of the great strengths of games as a medium is it allows us not just to read or hear about other people's lived experiences, but allows us to actually explore other worlds and experience other perspectives firsthand. That offers particular opportunities when it comes then to trying to advance understanding of conditions related to the mind.
Support from Wellcome Trust meant that we could engage deeply with researchers, as well as have access to patient groups who would tell us directly about their experiences.
This is how you create a character that feels real, by basing her on real people and real stories.
I see you.
On this wall here we've got Senua's character. So she's placed centrally here, and around her are the different voices in her head that go on this journey with her. and each of them has a distinct personality and character and represents something to her. I often use pictures of famous actors or people I know because it helps me visualize a voice and a face when writing the story. This is where I've laid out her backstory. So I often start, well, on this game I started with tons of these, lots of little notes that represents moments in her past, and I'd come up with a couple hundred of these, and you can see them all here in a big pile, and I'd stick them all on the wall and see if I can start seeing patterns, see if I can start building a narrative. And in this case I split her story into 4 phases of her life: childhood, girl, teen and adulthood. I distilled each of the post-its down, each of the periods down to the bare minimum I thought I could get away with, each representing a complete story for that part of her life. At this point I'm not even thinking about how you tell the story in the game. I'm just trying to define who she is. I want to believe that she's a real person and that the things she goes through in her life make sense.
They know you're weak. Get up and fight. You're pathetic.
Control the fear. Let it pass through. Remember its world.
Find the light, the light is your straight line to grow.
Open your eyes.
Games are not like movies, which generally have a standardized 3-act structure that's told linearly. Every game has its own structure. So there's an additional dimension that has to be worked out before you can begin to write the story. So on this tabletop, I've put a representation of the structure of the world. So it's a big volcanic caldera with an island in the middle and various pathways out. And I started to put some of those post-its on this table and try chucking them out in different areas and trying to figure out how the flow of the gameplay might work. This isn't a linear game like Heavenly Sword or DMC. It's actually got a semi-linear or semi-open structure. So the idea is that as you're traveling deeper and deeper into Helheim, you're uncovering these memories, these backstories, and they appear to her as hallucinations, as sometimes frightening hallucinations, but they're linked to her past, and if she can overcome those challenges, she can go deeper into Helheim, into her quest, but also deeper into her own psyche, and so she starts to understand herself better.
Baby, I must help them. They were calling for me.
The story can't be just something that happens in cutscenes. It has to be present in everything you see, touch, hear and play. The entire world structure is the story structure. Here are just some ideas on how we tell the story, how we replace things like keys and doors and locks and collectibles that you see in many games and change them up, change them into things that are more about human perception, apophenia, seeing patterns and faces in the world, and illusions to create new pathways and unlock new parts of Helheim.
Senua.
Over several weeks, the story and the structure of Helheim started to coalesce and make sense. But even so, it was very difficult to know what this would play like and feel like. So we took a small section of the map and made this the basis of our first playable.
The darkness. It gathers in the wind. It's getting stronger.
This process has taken a year, and only now are we at a point where we can start to embark on the full script development and really write the story in script form as the player would experience it.
Over the coming weeks, members of the Hellblade team will be fleshing out the details of the story and gameplay. Ultimately, creating a story experience is a group effort across many disciplines.
I just wanna feel deeper, deeper.
Many of the best games ever made offer players a new experience. This could be a new mechanic, a different way to tell a story, a groundbreaking use of technology, or a unique art style. It's not enough for Hellblade to be an independent version of a AAA game. It has to do more. It has to be something different.
The idea behind Hellblade was to put you in the shoes of a aspirational character, a warrior who happens to suffer from a severe mental health condition.
Get up and fight. You're pathetic.
There was an opportunity to take a more serious turn here and really understand the subject, and we weren't really sure about where that would take us.
For Hellblade, it led us to Professor Paul Fletcher, which gave us a deeper understanding of the mind. And it led us to Wellcome Trust, a global charitable foundation whose support and encouragement has opened up new paths for us to follow. This allowed us to explore gameplay mechanics and concepts that we wouldn't have pursued otherwise.
Mental health is a subject that affects a huge number of people, so it's not a subject that can just be reduced to game mechanics. There's a human perspective that really has to be understood.
Last month, Professor Paul Fletcher and Tamim were invited by Tracy Tingey to visit Recovery College East to meet with a group of service users to see if they would be willing to help in the development of Hellblade. We invited Tracy and her group to come to the studio for our next discussion.
We feel it's a very bold step to work on a project like this, to really look at breaking down some of the stigma and discrimination around mental health by learning from people that actually have the experience of hearing and seeing things that others don't, and being involved in the process of how that may be translated into the game. So it's really exciting to feel as if our voice is being heard.
So you're constantly trying to focus on that one point, because that rock is clear, I can see that rock, everything else is closing in, and then gradually the rock will go. It's kind of not the whole rock wouldn't be squiffy to start with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The feedback from the group, alongside additional feedback from Professor Paul Fletcher's research, gave us plenty of material to work with. For the next couple of weeks, Mark, our lead effects artist, started rapidly prototyping visual representations.
An example of a post effect I've been working on is the ability to melt objects within the world. Although this is just a screen-based post-process effect, what's interesting is it holds up as you pan the camera around and really looks as if the world is melting in 3D. What I was surprised to learn was a lot of their experiences were very vivid in colour and very bright, as well as the darker side of what they've been experiencing.
As we all know, my heart is so, love is so far away. Don't you know how I wanna feel deeper? I could never know how you grow, all these days are killing me. Now I see deep in me, insanity does unfold. I just wanna feel deeper, deeper. I just wanna feel deeper, deeper. As we all know, my heart is so, love is so far away. Don't you know how I wanna feel deeper? I could never know how you grow, all these days are killing me. Feel like this, read like this, I just wanna live, that's all. I just wanna feel deeper, deeper. I just wanna feel deeper, deeper.
The research and development efforts that we're exploring is taking us into new territory that is opening our eyes. We believe that it will make for a more original and compelling experience across all areas of the game.
We are not losing sight of the fact that our primary aim is to create a great game, but these days great games are everywhere. Great games are the baseline. You have to push further, find new areas to explore, and this is what we hope to do with Hellblade.
As we've had such a positive experience, we'll be expanding our work to engage more service users and more professionals in the field to gain a wider range of perspectives. We'll continue sharing our efforts and would like to thank everyone for their encouragement so far. In Hellblade, we aim to take our players on a journey with Senua to experience the world just as she does. A key element of this is audio, which led us to binaural recording. Binaural recording is a method of capturing sound by positioning two microphones in such a way that they hear the sound in the same way that a person would. For this, we use a microphone that replicates a human head.
Binaural audio really makes you feel present within a space, but crucially for our game, it allows us to emulate voice hearing, which is a phenomenon that Senua experiences a great deal of in our game.
You will die.
We'll all die someday.
It's getting dark.
I'll continue tomorrow.
You're afraid of the dark.
I'm being patient.
Getting closer to him.
So our intention is to record all VO with this method.
What you're watching now is our first test of binaural recording, where we took our microphone down into our car park to see how much environmental sound it would pick up. I'm here with Tamim, and I think it's fair to say that our tests so far have gone really well. And this is actually really quite an exciting step for us in terms of audio. When you look at some of the lived experiences that people have talked about, when they first have these experiences, there is an inclination to turn around and see where that voice has come from.
For everyone it's different, but I mean some people hear the voice as if it's coming from within their head, and so part of the test we'll do is to see if we can make a voice sound like it is coming from within your head. But for other people, different voices can occupy a particular space, and the clarity to which they hear them in that position is incredibly vivid and real.
When audio is recorded binaurally, it gives the listener a 3D sound experience, allowing them to place the sounds in the space around them. And what you're listening to now is binaural audio. So it should sound as if I am directly in front of you. If I move over here, it should sound like I'm in your left ear. And it should now sound like I'm whispering in your left ear. And if I move over here, it should sound like I'm in your right ear, whispering weirdly in your right ear. And as I talk and move around, you should be able to place me in the space around you, even behind your head. Throughout development, characters often go through a refinement process, and it's no different in the case of Hellblade. And in Senua, we want to create the most believable and compelling character that we've ever delivered. And with that in mind, we're revisiting Senua, starting with the face.
We wanted to get back to the very first concept of Senua that we had created, and to reinterpret this as a more realistic style, we used Melina, our video editor, as a reference point.
In previous dev diaries, we covered how we used a combination of photogrammetry to capture Melina's facial expressions. We also built a prototype device that we called the plant pot to try to capture minute skin details.
When Hugh joined the team, he wanted to push for a far higher degree of realism in Senua's face and her expressions. And to achieve this, he suggested we go and visit a company called 3Lateral out in Serbia. And this is a company that specializes in extremely high resolution 3D scanning of people's faces and subsequently creating character rigs so that we could use that in real time.
My company is called 3Lateral, and we specialize in characters. That's our primary passion. Since our inception we made the decision that we will not try to do anything else before we master this skill.
Senua has a lot of face paint on her, so we wanted to capture that alongside the facial expressions because the makeup and paint itself can change the way you express yourself.
Hugh asked me to experiment with different types of makeup to find something that crackles really nicely in the face, because they wanted to get really good detail for the face scan. So I just experimented with different types of makeup and face paints and ended up just using a normal face mask from the shop, and that seemed to give the best results.
The night before the scan was due to happen, we did one final makeup test in the hotel, just so that we could all make sure that everything was working as expected. Happy with the results, all we had to do then was to relax and wait.
That's it. Fucking roseblade around the floor.
3Lateral had a brand new experimental scanner built, which was really the best of its kind, but it was so large they couldn't fit it into their studio, so they had to create it in a nearby apartment. As the scanning device is such a closely guarded secret, we were asked not to film, but it's safe to say that it's far more impressive than our plant pot.
So is that without makeup? You have very smooth skin.
I'm sorry. Getting into the scanner felt like entering a giant spaceship, like you were really cut off from the outside world, and the only way to communicate with everyone else was over Skype.
Eyes closed, and here we go.
Once in the scanner, they wanted to capture every detail of how my face looks and moves, so I had to go through over 100 different facial expressions, which took a whole day.
Again, the specialization is a big thing with our team, so this scanner just scans the face and nothing else. But it's built to scan it in such detail so that we see all the tiniest wrinkles around the eyes and everything that's important for the emotion that human face portrays.
We are just starting to see the results of the process, and the facial expressions and complexity of the expressions is an order of magnitude higher than anything we've done in Heavenly Sword or DMC or Enslaved.
I think everybody knows that game audience has been accustomed to certain compromises when it comes to seeing characters, and that's okay because they can see behind the flopping mouth and things like that. But what truly believable face rig gives you is the drama, the storytelling. I guess that's the passion, to create characters who you can really perceive as characters immediately, not having to imagine the other side of them.
We're very grateful to Vladimir and the rest of the 3Lateral team for helping us to fulfill our ambitions for Senua. We look forward to sharing the results with 3Lateral and the rest of our followers very soon. Last time we showed you how we're pushing for better believability in Senua's face, but we're also going through a process of improving Senua's body.
Our intention has always been to make Senua feel like a real person with the body of a fighter and not someone that looks like a mannequin in a dress. But we didn't feel like we quite hit the mark in our vertical slice version of the character. So when Hugh joined the team, he took a different approach, which was to scan a real person.
Scanning can be expensive, but after researching options, we decided on a handheld scanner called the Artec Eva scanner. With the scanner in hand, we ran some tests on our animator Chris, and we got some really good results.
With the scanner we could scan a realistic body, but also we could scan different poses and muscle contractions, so we could see how the muscle, skin and flesh move in a real human body. So our next step was then to find a good body double for Senua.
We found a model called Vicky Wild from Vicky Wild Fitness, who we felt had a body shape that matched what we were looking for Senua. It took several hours to get a full body scan with all of the muscle contractions that we needed.
With a steady hand and a lot of patience, we were able to scan quite amazing levels of detail.
Comparing the 3D scan to the original Senua body has shown us just how much difference there is between a real human body and one that's been hand modelled.
It's very common for video game characters to have quite unrealistic, stylized proportions, but we felt in this case that sticking to the original shape of a human body, an actual human body, we would reach a level of believability that we wouldn't otherwise attain.
Matt, our technical artist, has been making sure that the muscles and skin fold and roll correctly on Senua's body. In addition, he's been taking care of the clothing so that these react realistically to how Senua moves. Hughes has been adding another layer of focus and detail to Senua so that the realism in her clothing, costume and hair matches the realism of her face and body, and even adding further details right down to the fingerprints.
We only have one principal character in Hellblade, and she's on screen at all times. So this is her story, and we want you to believe that she's a real person as you explore her world. So all this technology, art and effort that goes into her, it's not about showing how cool technology, art and effort is. It's about making you feel like she's real. So this is our main meeting room in the studio, and this is where we shoot everything for Hellblade. It's quite a departure from how we normally shoot stuff on our previous AAA games like DMC or Heavenly Sword or Enslaved. For them we went out to places like Giant Studios or Weta Digital, where they also shoot big movies. Usually we'd have a crew of about 20 or 30 people on set, so you'd have multiple actors, a few camera operators, a couple of video editors, and all the technical and support crew that you need for a major shoot. For Hellblade, we're doing this on a much smaller budget, so we've had to improvise. So an example is these poles that we use to support everything. These are normal IKEA poles, wardrobe poles really, and we've mounted onto them these office lights that we bought off Amazon for about 20 quid a pop. And up top here we have the Vicon Bonita motion capture system. So these are low-end systems which are fairly cheap. We have enough to capture one actor in a fairly big space. And so that's why in Hellblade we're focusing on just Senua as a character. But as we're also capturing voice as well as face and body, we need to soundproof the place. So for that, we bought these curtains, and they dampen most of the sound in the room, so they're pretty good for that. And what I'm standing on here is regular gym mats, which help dampen footsteps and sounds. And as they're white, they also reflect light back into the room. This is a rig that we produced. It's a regular GoPro camera, and attached to it is an LCD display. And so I would move around the scene and just capture live with video what's going on. So I've got a good idea of the framing, and because the camera's got markers on it, every nuance of the camera is being captured with the scene. Although we only have one camera and one camera operator, we felt we could use this to our advantage by having only continuous shots without cuts in the scene, And this gives a feeling that the viewer is an observer, like a presence, watching Senua throughout. So it informs the style of the storytelling. For me, I've always found that video reference is the best way to capture live on set, because what you're interested in is the performance. You have to trust that the technology behind the system will represent what you're capturing in video. So this is a helmet provided to us by Technoprops, and you can get different configurations of these kinds of things. So you can have like 4 cameras or a mono camera, but we felt like 2 cameras offered the best compromise between the quality of the capture and it just being lightweight and comfortable for the actor to wear, because what you're trying to do is to capture as natural a performance as you can. So the more stuff that gets in the way of that, the harder that becomes. It's actually the audio equipment that turns out to be the most expensive part of the setup. So this is an example of the microphone that we would use, and we would mount it just here above the head. That way it stays out of the way of any breathing sounds, and the quality is good. You know, you get a little bit of humming and noise, but that's stuff that you can always clean up. And over on this side we've got a handy microphone. So because we're capturing everything all audio live, we can't shout out directions or play music. So often we would pre-record VO and director notes before the actual scene, and then play it back using these wireless headphones. So both myself and the actor would wear these, and you can hear the VO and pacings that were recorded.
What is she looking at? What is she leaving behind? It's not too late to get into the boat and go back. No one will judge her. No one will ever know.
And in terms of crew, we only really need 3 people on set. Someone to look after the audio, someone to look after the mocap, and then myself directing, and of course the actor on top of that.
You are surrounded, trapped like an animal, hiding in a dark, cold pit. And now here it comes, in for the kill. Are you gonna let it slaughter you? No! Then get up!
It works. We're capturing face, voice, body and camera motion all at the same time. And all of this we've produced for a fraction of the price we would normally spend. So for about the price of a smart car.
In Hellblade, we're aiming to take you into Senua's unique world, and our lead effects artist Mark has been creating effects to help give the world a distinct sense of character.
Different weather conditions can really affect the mood of a scene, but being a small team, we don't have the resource to create a lot of bespoke content. So I've created a weather system that allows us to blend between different weather types wherever you are in the game. What you'll be seeing is the weather blending very quickly, I might add, between normal, pleasant, sunny morning into a steady amount of rain with some extra wind, and then we can go into full-on thunderstorm, complete with lightning flashes, much heavier rain. The light and fog values also blend seamlessly. This allows us to create whatever type of atmosphere we want in whatever part of the game you are. For the gusts of leaves in the game, I've used GPU particles, and then I'm using a vector field to drive their movement throughout the world. I have created the wind flow for the leaf debris using Maya and the fluid simulation. The GPU particles in Unreal can then follow these. This allows me to actually use the geometry of the environment to control where the leaves will blow. A large part of the atmosphere in Helheim is going to come from the fog. To aid us in making this look really good, we have written our own volumetric fog system. This allows us to have light scattering that is visible not only when you look at the light source coming through, but wherever you are in the game. We no longer have to manually place God rays or rely on a screen space solution. The 3D nature of it produces fantastic results without us having to do a lot of hard work. The volumetric fog also reacts to any dynamic light source that we have in the game. So this again stops us having to manually place halos around light sources. We are also able to blend between any of these fog settings and light settings with the weather system that I've previously mentioned. Fire is very much part of Senua's journey. I spent time making various fluid simulations within Maya to create a realistic motion. I then exported these simulations as animated textures to use on particle systems. I then set up the lighting and volumetric fog to complete the scene. Another layer we can add to the atmosphere is post-processing. This isn't just a case of adding bloom and colour grading. We can actually define materials that can affect the pixels of the final screen image and give us some really interesting results. In this example, I'm distorting the pixel position and changing the pixel colour based on a texture mask. I'm also able to cut out certain objects so that they don't get affected. Here is a scene without any effects or lighting, and what you will see is what goes into making the final believable scene. As you can see, adding layers of effects and lighting to the game really adds a huge amount of atmosphere, and this is something we will continue to evolve and push as the project continues.
As we come to the end of 2015, we're wrapping up the production of the first area of Hellblade. In the new year, our focus shifts to a new area and a new part of Senua's story. We look forward to sharing our journey with you in 2016. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He said ham.
Hi, my name's Dominic Matthews and I'm the Product Development Ninja here at Ninja Theory. We've just announced our new game Hellblade, and throughout the course of development we want to show you as much as we possibly can. Mel here, who's been working with us for a number of years now, will be your eyes on the project, filming as much as she can.
Okay, when I say action, do a slow turn to the middle. Action. What do you reckon? Do you want a cup of tea or some water? Cool. Something evil's arrived.
I feel like the guy from Friends.
To realise the vision of Senua as a tough Celtic barbarian, we got Stuart on board to join the team as the art director. One more.
Now you do the same.
Right, done. Happy?
Yep.
In many ways, it's harder to create a third-person game than a first-person game because your character is on screen at all times, and there's an expectation that they'll navigate the world and react realistically. Here's how we're approaching this in Hellblade.
In our early third-person action games, the character was little more than a robot that you would push around through the world. And in Enslaved, we then took the idea that the character is alive and started to incorporate some body language there so she could express back to the player.
We have more memory now and better animation tools, so we want to make sure that Senua's appearance and movement is part of what makes her feel believable.
Now, we already had Senua moving around the world in a basic fashion, but we kept wanting to add more layers, like what would she look like when she was frightened, when she's wading through water, when she's wounded, and the list just kept growing and growing. But we only have 2 animators on the project, and they have to cover all of Senua and all of the enemies, so this was a problem that needed solving.
Having built our own mocap studio, we decided that motion capture was the only possible way that we had a chance of achieving this within our constraints. As we had never used mocap before for gameplay animations, we had to test that this would work. And as there was no fallback, the only other option would be to severely limit what Senua was capable of.
We started with the basics, standing, walking, running, jogging, in all directions. How do you make that feel responsive and look good with motion capture?
So here's an example of what the takes look like before they've been cleaned up. So you can see there are like parts where the feet are broken and the toes and things like that, and but it's easy to fix. So here's a version where actually it's all been cleaned up. It looks much more polished, and it's at this stage that we would put it into the game. But I find the biggest challenge is making nice blends. So obviously you want the animations to blend really well together and then to be seamless, so you can't see where the transitions start and end, but also keeping the responsiveness of the characters that we want. I've brought all the animations, all the movement animations in for Senua. This is a strafe blend space. As you can see, all these, I mean, these are what, like 5 or 6 animations, and they're all in phase and in sync, and they just blend together perfectly. To add to the responsiveness, we added things like having her lean in the direction that you're running in. It gives you a response straight away as soon as you start like turning the stick. It just feels more natural than her running in a straight line all the time.
Now we knew the basics worked, we then captured all the layers, walking in a fearful manner, walking through water, walking through fire, walking through deep water. That one was particularly difficult because you have to simulate the resistance that the water would have against the character.
So the biggest issue with looping animations is that after a while they just look like looping animations. People don't always walk in the same way, so we can try and add this variety to the game by mixing together a number of different cycles with different characteristics. Let's make her cough. Okay, so here we're trying to simulate her walking through smoke, and I've added 3 looping animations which it decides to play at random intervals. This means that we don't always get the same loop, and it's totally random each time, which adds unlimited variety.
We also captured all of our one-off interactions, such as opening doors or traversing parts of the environment, such as narrow ledges or precarious beams. We now had the motion capture animation for Senua crossing the beam in a steady fashion, balancing to the extreme left and extreme right and falling. So code and design can now take this and vary the amount that she would naturally sway, ultimately leading to her falling. And in game, you would have to compensate for the swaying using the left sticks to get her across safely.
So far we've shot 3 to 4 days worth of movement, which gives us the bulk of what we need, and we're in the process of adding these to the game. The results so far have been promising, and we'll capture more as and when we need it.
I don't see motion capture as a silver bullet that replaces animators. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's an empowering tool for animators. So whenever we do the motion capture session, the animators are there to make sure that they get exactly what they want. Only then can they take the raw materials and shape the character to be responsive, to be consistent, to be who they want the character to be. In the same way that an illustrator would take a live model or photo reference to create their vision of what they want that illustration to be.
The end result is that animators like Chris can spend less time on the basics and the mundane and focus their attention on making the character feel responsive, natural and full of character.
So we've prepared this scene to reveal our new version of Senua. And if you watch very, very closely, you'll notice that there's something strangely alive about her. So, action.
Stay still, stay quiet, hide, don't tell
Their gods can see into your mind. They will use this power to destroy you.
They won't stop me. I can still feel him.
Whatever's left of him, they will never let him go.
I'm not gonna let him rot here!
You're the one rotting here.
Leave me alone!
You will die here.
No!
And all your suffering will have been for nothing!
Shut up!
What you have just seen was not a pre-canned scene from a game. It was performed live by an actress and rendered in real time directly within the game world, marking a milestone in real-time performance capture.
I'll find you, my love. I promise.
And cut.
Who said that?
So if you look on that side of the stage, you'll see that Melina, our actress, has just performed the entire scene live in real time from within the Hellblade world.
Creating a believable digital character that you can interact with has been a holy grail since the birth of computer graphics. Our team at Epic has been wanting to prove that this is possible today using nothing more than consumer hardware and the power of Unreal Engine 4.
The first time I was able to have a conversation with Senua from within the game world, it really hit me. It meant that as a director I could set up the scene and have full control over things like lighting and cameras and VFX. So if I want to add fire to the scene, I can just go, let there be fire. And the power of this means that we can tune the performance to the scene without any green screen inside.
This idea went from concept to proof in only 7 weeks. It involved a collaboration between Unreal Engine developers Epic Games, the facial technology of 3Lateral, the live facial system of Cubic Motion, and the creatives at Ninja Theory, developers of Hellblade.
Hellblade is self-published and independent, so we're quite a small team, about 16 people. Yet we still wanted to create one of the most believable characters out there. Senua is a Celtic warrior on a quest into the Viking heartland, but as a result of trauma she's struggling with psychosis. And so we wanted to represent the physical, emotional and mental trials of her journey.
Cambridge-based Ninja Theory took their actress Melina to Serbia to 3Lateral, who specialise in high-end face scanning and rigging. 3Lateral scanned over 100 different expressions from which they constructed a digital double of Melina that could portray every possible facial expression. For realistic skin, Melina was photographed under several lighting setups to create a skin shader that could react with light to simulate wrinkles, blood flow, peach fuzz, and subsurface scattering. Her body was scanned to create a digital body double, and clothing was modelled and textured by artists. Clothing, hair and fur were created and simulated under physics to complete the character. Ninja Theory set up a scene within the Hellblade world in Unreal, with Epic helping to make sure the lighting was both believable and cinematic. Cubic Motion in Manchester, UK, developed a facial solver that could translate video of Melina's face directly onto the facial rig in real time. Epic helped stream and synchronize the face, body, voice, and scene data in real time within the Hellblade game world.
Rot it!
By combining the skills of Ninja Theory, Epic Games, 3Lateral, Cubic Motion, iKinema, and Xsense, I think we've taken a big step forward in crossing the uncanny valley, and would love to see what other developers can do with this technology.
In the very near future, it means that virtual characters that are stunningly real and present will be able to interact with you in ways that just weren't possible before.
Go on then, just a bit more.
Do you want to build a snowman? Let's go outside and play.
Beautiful singing voice, beautiful.
For us, this marks an exciting change in terms of what is possible for game production, virtual reality production, and also movie production.
When you're actually in virtual reality and you're looking into the eyes of this character, it really puts you there. You believe that that person is real. It feels like we're one step closer to the future we imagined.
I'll find you, man. I promise.
In Hellblade, we wanted to create a combat system that was more immediate and more grounded than in our previous games. One that didn't require the player to memorize combo strings and skill trees, but at the same time required skill and mastery.
In previous diaries, we've talked about how our camera and controls have a very different feel, more intimate and subjective than the usual distant third-person cameras we normally have in our games. With this viewpoint came an opportunity to pursue a directional combat system where attacking and blocking could be done in one of 4 different directions.
Like so many areas of game development, promising paths can lead to dead ends, and in this case it was becoming clear that directional combat was limiting gameplay.
There were several issues. For one, directional combat limited the kind of animations that we could create. It also made multi-opponent combat very awkward because you couldn't use the movement stick to switch between enemies. And while directional combat was mechanically sound, it just didn't feel satisfying, and no matter how much we pushed, it always just felt mechanical.
It was time to change tack. Juan joined the design team to focus on combat, and with him brought a fresh perspective.
My approach was to focus on simple but tight core actions, like fast and slow attacks, blocking and evading, but work on making them flow really responsively and intuitively. Our combat system asks the player to make tactical choices instead of relying on memorizing and executing complex combos, although there's still a fair amount of depth to the moves that you can perform. With the movement stick no longer used for directional combat, we could now focus on experimenting with fighting multiple enemies at the same time and how the player would flow between them.
While Juan was making great progress, development time was running out, and as we only have 2 animators covering all of Senua and all of the enemies, we could see trouble ahead.
Nevertheless, we felt there was an opportunity to take a different approach, and we wanted to test this out. So we reached out to a skilled stuntwoman who could perform the types of moves that we imagined Senua capable of. We asked Chloe Bruce, who recently played Daisy Ridley's stunt double in Force Awakens, to come to the studio for a test.
Using the game as reference, we wanted to see if Chloe could match the timings and flow of Senua rather than doing it the other way around, which is how it's normally done. After half a day of capturing, we went to work to see if we could translate this back into the game.
So we tested a couple of combat strings out to see how quick the workflow was and also what quality we could achieve in the time. I had to make tweaks to the general timing and also poses. We managed to create 2 playable combos in pretty much a day. This would have taken a lot longer traditionally. The great thing about that is that I can then focus on the things that we can't really motion capture, like some of the more outlandish actions in the game.
With the help of Chloe, we proved that we could make combat work for Senua, but we still needed to find someone to represent all of the enemies in the game, and we found that with Kali Nell.
With our combat mocap tests complete and with Chloe and Callie on board, we had everything in place to make it work. We couldn't use our internal studio because the ceiling was too low and the space too small, so we booked the Imaginarium Studios in London to capture the rest of the combat.
And over the next 2 days at Imaginarium, we captured as much as we could for both Senua and all of the enemies. The direction we're heading in seems to be paying off. With mocap we have a better base of realism. Without directional combat we have more freedom to explore styles and moves. And so we're working on this hard right now, and we hope to show you the results pretty soon.
Over the past 6 weeks we've been focusing our efforts on moving Hellblade's combat along the path to completion. And in this diary we're very happy to be sharing our progress with you so far.
You will walk into the lair of the beast. Look it in the eye and fight for his soul. This is your mission. This is your quest.
We had just finished the Senua trailer and we picked one scene and we used that scene to really focus us on finalizing the Senua model, her character, her performance, the mood, everything that defined her.
I'll find you, my love. I promise.
Now we wanted to repeat that same trick but for combat, and so we picked an area of the game that was very combat heavy and we went for it.
Senua is smaller and physically weaker than the Vikings. It was important for us to make her feel vulnerable and not a superhero. Because she's physically weaker, she needs to rely on speed and technical ability to overcome her enemies. Light, heavy and melee attacks, along with blocking and evading, are our core abilities. Understanding the nuance of these and how they flow between each other gives you a speed advantage in combat. In order to make this feel fast, smooth and responsive, we have to set up hundreds of parameters in the combat editor that Mel created.
The combat editor allows us to build, edit and control every aspect of the combat system in real time. With it, Juan, Chris and others on the team can bring together animations, effects, transitions, sounds and gameplay to get the effect that they want.
The motion capture shoot gave us a ton of information to work with, but it's really only the start of the process. Both GTEC and I then had to go through all of the data and edit and polish it by hand to get exactly what we needed. Afterwards, we then added animated cameras and facial expressions to Senua to emphasize her reactions in combat.
A goal and a challenge for Hellblade was to give the player all feedback without the use of an on-screen HUD. So, taking cues from action movies, everything had to be communicated visually and with sound.
Every attack has a strength, damage and effects associated with it. We built an effects table that allows us to specify what particle effects, post effects, etc. get associated with each strike. We show enemy health with visible cuts and bleeding, and we show Senua's health with a combination of post-process effects. So if I let Senua get hit here, you'll see blood splats appear onto the screen, and then as you get more wounded, we bring in a vignette and slowly desaturate the screen as well.
We also added a new multi-opponent system, allowing the player to switch effortlessly between multiple enemies at the same time. These fights are very challenging as enemies surround you from all sides. Rather than pulling back the camera or adding wide sweeping moves, we instead wanted to reinforce the idea that how you position yourself in combat is very, very important.
Everything was staged so that we had a good series of combat encounters, a good visual progression throughout the level, and a story through line that weaved it all together.
So the majority of this level is made out of individual kit parts, which allows me to iterate and change and set dress with speed. There are some areas which are bespoke, like the Helheim Tower over here in the background. Using real-world reference, we set up the lighting and atmospherics. These can be dynamically changed in gameplay to portray Senua's mood. Then we heightened the effects of these to give the final look.
Sound is very important for understanding combat. Every attack type has a unique sound effect and vocal quality. We also use 3D positional sound so that you can know where an attack comes from, even when they are attacking from behind. For the music, we use one of Andy LaPlega's combat tracks and split it into sections. Then, I will tie the music system to gameplay to dynamically follow the action.
Combat development doesn't end here, and everything you've seen is still work in progress. We've got plenty more to do, but we do feel like we've made some big strides forward. Now we move on to our new challenge with renewed confidence.
Sound plays an incredibly important role in Hellblade's Senua's sacrifice, and a particularly distinct part of the soundscape are the voices that Senua hears throughout her journey.
Where are you? He's lost. He's lost. You can't save him. He's lost.
You won't find him. You're not gonna find him. You will never find him. You will never find him.
Listen to you. Did you feel him?
As part of Senua's experiences of psychosis, she hears voices, something that is very common with mental health difficulties and is experienced by huge numbers of people.
I really had no idea what somebody who hears voices actually hears. I mean, do they actually hear voices, or is it more of an internal voice? I really didn't have a concept of what this would sound like. So we wanted to find out.
I'm not gonna let him rot here!
You're the one rotting here.
Leave me alone!
You will die here.
No!
And all your suffering will have been for nothing!
We wanted to make sure that the voices the player hears are true to the types of experiences that voice hearers have. To do so, we reached out to people with first-hand experience, including a group at Recovery College East, the Voice Collective, Rachel Waddingham from Behind the Label, and experts in the field.
My name's Charles Fernyhough. I'm a professor of psychology at Durham University, and I lead a project called Hearing the Voice, which is looking at the experience of hearing voices, or to use its medical term, auditory verbal hallucinations.
They know you're here. They're watching.
Hearing voices is an experience that is usually associated with severe mental illness, diagnoses such as schizophrenia, although it's also associated with a number of other psychiatric diagnoses. And crucially, we know that hearing voices is a part of ordinary life for many people who don't meet the criteria for mental illness. So when I first heard about the development of Hellblade and had a chance to engage with Ninja Theory about our research, I was really keen to do so because there's a huge problem of stigma associated with these experiences. They're misunderstood, highly stigmatized, and that problem's particularly acute with younger people. So these experiences tend to start happening to people in adolescence and early adulthood.
She can see you now. Coming in. That was a mistake.
Professor Charles Fernyhough really opened our eyes to the depth and range of voice hearing and invited several voice hearers to the studio so that we could show them the game and really talk through their experiences. It was really surprising to hear that these are characters that they live with, that are important to them, and in some cases they wouldn't want to live without.
And the whole thing around you'll regret that, if that's a conversation that she can hear but it isn't directed to her, that gives that sense of more of what the real experience can be like.
That's interesting. That's very good actually.
We discovered that people had a wide range of experiences, from hearing just one voice coming from a distinct location to hundreds of voices that came from all different directions. And one thing that stood out to us was that for many people, the voices had distinct personalities and characters, and this was something that we wanted to bring through into the game.
Please stop. You'll never come back if you go there.
You will die here, and all your suffering will have been for nothing.
Binaural audio, where you can position the voices in space, reflects better what the voice hearers were telling us they heard. There are many different styles of voices that she hears. Some of them are fully developed characters. There are other characters that are based on people she once knew.
Everyone hates her. She's cursed.
And then there's the Furies, and these are disembodied snatches of words and sounds that torment her or sometimes assist her. Finding a style for the Furies was one of the major challenges of this project. So I asked for help from a friend of mine, Helen, that I knew, who was part of a theatre group called Rash Dash. Helen came to the studio with Abby and Mark, and together we worked out how we could make these voices come to life around you. Based on the experiences of the voice hearers, it felt like the voices were far more complex, intertwining and chaotic than we originally envisioned. If we could represent not just the voice but the physicality of these characters interacting with each other, we might come up with something unexpectedly different.
Oh, it's really hard not to follow the voices, that's so weird.
The next job was to implement the voices in-game alongside the music and sound effects. This is the job of David, our Hellblade audio lead, working closely with Tamim.
una de las cosas importantes en el diseño sonoro de Hellblade es transformar lo que ves en lo que ve Senua y crear así un universo sonoro muy particular. Es una diferencia muy sutil, no es lo que se espera que tú escuches, sino es lo que Senua escucha. Tener la suerte de contar de primera mano con gente que escucha voces realmente nos ha ayudado a crear una visión más real y más personal. Una de las cosas que hicimos fue presentarles dos versiones de una misma sección del juego con diferentes diseños sonoros. Uno con las voces más limpias y más como las escuchamos normalmente, y otro con las voces mucho más procesadas, más caóticas, más como si fuera más ruido. Y curiosamente la que es más real, más limpia y más clara es la que ellos eligieron, y la que realmente al final es la que más te impacta y más te llama la atención. Contrariamente a lo que se suele hacer en diseño sonoro, que es exagerar todo, bajar el pitch y hacer todo que suene súper grave, nos quedamos con la versión más limpia y más humana al final.
It's very hard to represent what this experience is like, partly because it's so varied, partly because it's such a personal, intense, emotional experience. It's testament to how Ninja Theory have been reading the research, listening to what the researchers are saying, but also crucially listening to the experts by experience, that what they've come up with is so compelling. It's by far the best representation I've heard of what these experiences are like.
Yeah. Oh, that's not him in real life.
It points to something important that I think games can offer, which is to let you live in the skin of someone else, someone who perceives the world very differently to most of us, and understand what they're going through in a way that no amount of reading about the subject can do.
Our work on Hellblade sound continues, as does development across the game. We thank you for your support so far, and we look forward to sharing another update with you soon.
Hi, my name is Melina Jürgens and I play the heroine Senua in Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I'm also Ninja Theory's video editor, which makes me responsible for all the dev diaries that you're watching, like the one right now. And because I'm away on my Christmas holidays right now and I didn't want to leave you without another diary for the rest of the year, I asked Tam and Dom if I could do an episode on how I became Senua while I'm out here in Hong Kong. So I'm 25 years old and I come from a place called Paderborn in Germany, which lies in the northwest of the country. And at the age of about 16, I decided to move to England and study photography and video editing. And around 5 years ago, I then joined Ninja Theory in Cambridge, and I was working on projects like Devil May Cry, where I filmed behind the scenes on the mocap shoots, and I also created the game trailers. So like I mentioned earlier, my actual job on Hellblade was to be the video editor only and to create episodes about the game and put them online for the public to follow every step of game development. And only about 2 or 3 months into the project, my path kinda changed from being behind the camera documenting everything to also being in front of the camera as lead character Senua. So while Ninja Theory was still looking for a professional actress to play the role of Senua, they kept asking me to be a stand-in for their tech experiments or sometimes to just try out different styles of makeup for Senua's face or war paint on her arms, for example. Somehow I started getting more and more involved in the process without actually realizing it at that point. And they started asking me if I could act out little test scenes for them, but they didn't realize that acting is actually my worst nightmare and I've always avoided it, even in school. So because the scenes were quite dramatic, involving crying and screaming, and I was having to perform in front of my work colleagues, I felt very embarrassed, and I kept asking them to turn their backs on me or to switch the lights off because I just felt so uncomfortable being watched by them.
Leave me alone!
I think they're more used to me being the clown of the office rather than a very serious person. So after helping out for a while, Tam approached me and asked me if I wanted the role as Senua, and I was really surprised and had no idea what to say to him. But Tam felt that I could do it and that he could direct me, and she said that I'm already acting in the office every day without even realizing it.
No, you do this.
It took me a while to think about the offer because I was worried if I was capable enough to do the job, because I've never acted before, but also I was thinking of what would happen to my video editing job. In the end I just went for both and ended up doing video editing while sometimes still wearing my mocap suit. After accepting the offer, everything went pretty fast. The first thing we had to do was fly to Serbia to get my face scanned by 3 lateral. The face scan was really fun, but it had a downside to it, which was the face mask that I had to wear all day. After about an hour it got rock solid and it was becoming very painful.
Oh my god, it hurts.
After they had a detailed scan of my face, Ninja Theory also decided to scan my body and muscles. To prepare me for that, they sent me to a personal trainer called David Morgan, who's an ex-Olympic weightlifting athlete and 5 times Commonwealth champion. We only had 6 weeks time to get my body into shape, so after measuring my body and telling me what I can and can't eat, the aim was to lose body fat and build as much muscle as possible in the short amount of time that we had. I managed to lose about 3 kilos of body fat and gain around the same amount of muscles, so then I was ready to go to my body scan. After the body scan was done, I still decided to stay fit for the role as Senua because it made me feel good, but also it came across better in the mocap when I felt strong. So I continued going weightlifting and doing everything that Dave taught me, but I also started getting into boxing and MMA training, and I also recently had my first class in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. To prepare mentally for the role as Senua, I really tried to remember my own real-life experiences, but I also had the chance to meet a lovely group of people who have experiences with severe mental illness, seeing visions and also hearing voices. Those meetings were very useful because I got to understand the human side of things, of what it feels like and how it affects them, and also how they're fighting to overcome the challenges that they're facing. Because I am now representing those experiences, I really tried hard to imagine how it would feel like and how I would react in their position. So I prepared my body and mind, but to improve my acting skills, I decided to rehearse away from people to come out of my shell more. So sometimes I went into an empty room or into a forest to just experiment of what I'm capable of. At this point, I had no idea that soon I'd be performing in front of thousands of people rather than just a few work colleagues. At our live presentations, I was not able to ask the audience to turn their backs on me. Those live presentations were extremely hard. We did months and months of rehearsals and had 14-hour days. I also had blinding lights in my eyes the whole time and headphones taped to my ears with audio representations, so I couldn't hear or speak to anybody. I was also attached to cables, so I couldn't really walk anywhere without asking someone for permission.
Go on, pony. It's the monkey. It looks like a monkey on a leash.
But the team was super cool and supportive, and we always used the time in between takes to joke around and keep the spirits up.
Fresh fish.
The pressure of performing in front of so many people was extremely high, especially because I was supposed to show off a brand new tech that kept breaking during the rehearsals. Moments before the presentation, I got so scared that my face just went blank. Everybody started to panic backstage because they thought the facial sober was broken, but it was just me being so scared that my face went completely frozen. When they opened the curtains to reveal me live on stage, my voice was shaking, I had tears in my eyes, and my nervousness actually worked out to my advantage because it made my performance much more believable.
I'll find you, my love. I promise.
have never been an actor before, I thought that everything I had to do was normal. But only afterwards I kind of realized that some of the things I had to do have never even been attempted before.
So if you look on that side of the stage, you'll see that Melina, our actress, has just performed the entire scene live in real time from within the Hellblade world.
Sigraf was slightly more difficult because I had to play two Senuas at the same time, so one Senua speaking to the other. So I had to count a lot of timing in my head and watch markers on the floor to not have the two characters bump into each other. Sigraf was a lot more risky on the performance side and also on the technology side, but in the end everything worked out great and the performance was spot on and the timing was spot on, the technology didn't break, and we even managed to win the Real-Time Life Award.
On behalf of everyone who worked on this project, I'd like to say thank you. This has been like a labor of love for really the past, 7 weeks.
My experience on Hellblade has been amazing so far and I feel really lucky to be part of the project. It's been a great personal journey for myself and I really can't wait to see what more there is to come in the next year. In the name of the team at Ninja Theory and also myself, we want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas.
Unlike DMC Devil May Cry, Hellblade isn't all about the combat. Combat is important to Hellblade, but at its heart, Hellblade is about the journey and the struggle of Senua on a mythical adventure.
In the famous book Don Quixote, the hero sees the world interpreted through madness, seeing giants instead of windmills. And in a similar way, when you play the game, you experience the world through Senua's mind's eye.
Senua knows that there is no going back to how things were.
We like to think that we experience the world almost like a high-definition photograph, as it really is, but actually a lot of the time what we're doing is using what we already know to shape and govern what we perceive. You know, if we recognise that principle of how the brain functions, it may be that we can begin to understand what happens in the context of psychosis, because psychosis can't really easily be understood as just some malfunction of the mind. It's actually a very creative process where somebody constructs a world.
She's finally arrived in the land of mist and fog. The place the Northmen call Hell.
In Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, I play a character called Senua, who's a Celtic warrior that goes on a vision quest into the Viking heartland. It's a journey of suffering which can be quite dark and sometimes brutal. Everything that Senua sees is shaped by visions from her own past, but also Viking mythology.
At the start of the project, we researched as much as we could Viking mythology, art and culture, but the more we looked into it, the deeper we went, the more I started to feel like we were out of our depth. So we reached out to Dr. Elizabeth Ashman Rowe, a leading scholar in the Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic from the University of Cambridge.
We showed the game to Dr. Elizabeth Ashman Rowe and she gave us a lot of very detailed feedback on Norse art, culture and myth. And we realised we could go a lot deeper on the Norse legend. She agreed to come on board as consultant and presented a trove of reference material to the team.
I was talking about idols. We don't have a lot of them left. We hear many descriptions of wooden men or sacrifices on poles.
The more we learned from Elizabeth, the more we wanted to share these myths with you. So we created lore stones and scriptures that relate to the Norse legend for you to find throughout Senua's journey.
A secret path along the cliffs will take you to Gjallarbrú, the bridge that separates the living from the dead. The roots of the Tree of Death will take you to new lands, where you will face the trials.
Look around and you'll see them. The drowned, the sick. Here they lie, rotting in the fields and rivers of hell.
I've often been struck by the sense that I get talking to people with psychosis that they do feel themselves on a quest. I mean, it may be a figurative one, and in some cases people actually experience a genuine physical quest. They're looking for someone or something or some answer, and with the feeling that if they can only achieve that, then there will be a release or a resolution to all of the things that are plaguing them.
And she will fulfill her vow, whatever the cost.
We've covered in previous diaries how we've worked with experts, organisations and people with lived experience to simulate voice hearing and visions.
She's not gay.
But another lesser known aspect of psychosis is the ability to see patterns and associations and find meaning in them. One individual we spoke to told us in vivid terms how this felt for him, where every day felt like a puzzle, the clues of which were found in symbols, sounds, colours and visions in the world all around him.
I and my colleagues at Cambridge University have been doing a lot of work exploring how people can use their prior expectations to increase their sensitivity to stimuli in their environment. And one of the very striking things that we found recently is that people with psychosis or prone to experiencing psychotic symptoms may actually be remarkably good at that. Maybe that under some circumstances they're actually capable of using their prior knowledge to really enhance the way in which they see patterns and put things together.
The idea of illusion shifts in perception is common in both psychosis and Norse mythology, so these ideas form the backbone of the puzzle experiences in the game.
But it's not just a gameplay mechanic. Some of it is more experiential. Perhaps the wind is connected to your movement, or just paying attention to something changes the way it sounds.
He's dead.
A good example of where perception changes gameplay is a section of the game where Senua loses her sight and must rely on sound and the barest of vision to navigate the world.
One of the service users we worked with, she told us about her experience with catatonia, where she felt completely cut off from the world. So we put a section in the game where Senua can barely see or hear anything, and as a player you have to try and find a way out of it. When I did the body mocap for that section, I tried to perform everything with my eyes shut so that I can get a sense of fear and anxiety, and hopefully you will feel this when you play the section.
We've now captured hundreds of animations to make Senua believable in both gameplay and cutscenes. The decision to create a low-cost mocap space in the studio has really paid off, as otherwise the costs would have been prohibitive.
Given the complexities of intertwining mythology, backstory, art and gameplay, it took us longer than we expected to get to this point. But now all of the story scenes have been captured, all of the VO recorded, and the gameplay is fully playable from start to finish. We now run dailies where representatives from art, story, sound, design and gameplay are all present, and we spend an hour every day reviewing a section of the game, and that very day we implement everything that we can think of to make it a polished experience. And this is a process we're going to rinse and repeat every single day until we finish the whole experience.
Because she sounds too scared. The breathing's good, it really gives you a presence. And breathing's going to be all the time, even when she's not scared. Yeah. Okay, cool.
We've just completed our alpha milestone for Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, and that means that for the first time you can now play the Hellblade experience from the beginning right through to the end. This, however, doesn't mean that the game is finished. There's still a huge amount of work to be done, but all of the levels, gameplay and story are now in place. But it does mean that we can now focus on what really matters, and that's the player experience. We look forward to bringing you another update soon. George Lucas famously said that 50% of the movie experience is sound, and in a game like Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, the sound has to be much more than experiential. It has to be interactive, reflecting your actions and guiding you through the gameplay experience.
Where's he goes?
We think of sound as something that exists in the world that we happen to hear, but in reality it's not quite so simple. Our mind interprets sound based on our past experiences, our expectations, and our state of mind.
In this demonstration, the sound changes based on what you see. Look at the video on the left. What do you hear?
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
Now look at the video on the right.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
The sound hasn't changed, yet the brain hears something different based on what you see.
This is a key concept in Hellblade. We want you to hear the world as interpreted through Senua's mind. As her state of mind changes, as she's in different parts of her journey, sounds will morph and change accordingly and interactively.
One of our goals on Hellblade from the very beginning has been to create a game with zero or at least very minimal HUD. So where there might ordinarily be an objective marker, we've had to find other ways to communicate to the player where to go. And one of these has been to rely on 3D spatial sound.
Usando el sistema de blueprints en Unreal, creé una lógica que te permite colocar un objeto en el mundo y según la distancia en la que estés de este objeto, si está dentro de un ángulo de visión o no, te permite modificar el sonido y de esta manera nos sirve para guiar al jugador.
To test this fully, we came up with this idea that you could play a level that was entirely pitch black, just using 3D sound to navigate. We tried it out and it worked, but it was a little frustrating because in real life at least you can rely on other senses such as touch. So we dialed in vision a little bit so that you could find your way, but in principle the idea was sound.
Tuvimos oportunidad de hablar con gente que escuchaba voces y nos comentaban cómo estas voces están colocadas alrededor de su cabeza en un espacio y nosotros tomamos esa idea y la llevamos a cabo con las grabaciones binaurales.
Once again. Hell is reaching deep inside of her.
Esto hace que no se sientan reales, pero a la vez hacen que tengan una presencia y las sientas en ese lugar.
Welcome. You're safe with me. I'll be right here, nice and close so I can speak without alerting the others.
Las grabaciones binaurales impresionan bastante la primera vez que las oyes, pero también tienen sus limitaciones. Cuando grabas con un micrófono binaural, una vez lo transportas al engine, no se puede modificar esa grabación. No puedes colocar las voces en otra posición o girarlas alrededor en otra posición que no sea la que ya está grabada.
I nearly discounted binaural sound due to its limitations, but then I came up with this idea that you, the player, is an observer, an active participant, and as long as the voices were relative to you, it didn't matter if you moved the camera around or where you were relative to Senua, it would all still make sense.
No one will judge her. No one will ever know. Oh, she heard us.
To increase the sense of presence for Senua in the world, David had this idea to add a breathing system so that you could feel the effort that Senua was making, whether resting, fighting, sprinting, or in fear. We then had this idea to link David's breathing system to visuals and other systems. So in this one area of the world, the burning forest, the embers and particles breathe with Senua's breath, and it's strangely unnerving and adds to the bizarre sense of reality that Senua experiences.
Tenemos todos estos elementos sonoros sucediendo a la vez, todas estas situaciones en el juego, y tenemos que controlar la mezcla final en tiempo real, una mezcla dinámica donde el mix se va adaptando a todo lo que va pasando, y para esto usamos todas las herramientas de audio que nos ofrece Unreal, y aparte hacemos nuestras pequeñas herramientas para controlarlo.
Maybe it's super loud. The thunder. No? Oh, it sounds twice.
Imaginaos, ya es muy difícil hacerlo hacer una mezcla de todos estos elementos en una película, cuánto más difícil hacerlo en un entorno que varía en tiempo real.
I've always been advised that you can't rely on sound as a primary feedback mechanism in games because the player might be listening to loud music or they might have terrible speakers at home. But after the work we've done on Hellblade and after hearing the results, I don't think I could ever follow that path again. I think sound really is so important that it has to be part of the experience.
Focus! Behind you. You're stronger.
Senua's real story is revealed in the visions and voices that she hears, such that the further and deeper we go into hell, the more we reveal her backstory. I never gave up hope that we could find a way to actually visibly see the characters instead of just hearing their voices.
Don't give up. Not like this.
So when it came to casting, I sneakily cast for their face, what they look like, as well as their voices.
Do you hear them?
So during development, we started to run some tests to see if we could bring characters into the game in a different way. For example, we ran a few tests with Kinect cameras to see if we could use them as cheap 3D scanners, but the noise levels of what we were capturing were far too high. We also did a test with green screen video, where we captured Melina and projected her face back onto a 3D model within the game world. And this worked pretty well, but it was quite technically difficult and fiddly to set up and get right.
I must help them. They were calling for me.
We also tried using 360 video to capture scenes. The problem with this is the resolution of the video images. You can see the pixels, and even with heavy post-processing, it's still logistically quite difficult to shoot 360 video that fits well in a 3D world. Not all of these experiments were successful, in fact none of them were, but in the process I learned what doesn't work and what could work, and I felt like there was a way to mix video with 3D real-time in a way that wouldn't look out of place. Now by this time the VO sessions were coming up in a matter of days, and so I made a very late call to shoot video during these sessions because I didn't want to miss the chance of having their characters in the game, even if we weren't 100% sure of how we were going to get them in there. But there was one problem, which was it meant we had to get all of the actors in costumes. Luckily my friend Jess happens to be a costume designer and makeup artist, so I asked her if she could help out. And she only really had a day or two per character. It was such short notice, but in the end she did a really great job and it was a lot of fun.
Who are you? Who is she?
Right.
Oh, you see little front teeth.
There you go.
Hello.
The main cast consists of Stephen Hartley, who plays Senua's druid father Zimble.
How much movement's going to happen here, Tam? Because...
It's not going to be action.
Okay.
Well, there'll be a bit of movement.
Let me go! No! No! Stay! No! Ever put sugar in my tea?
Oliver Walker, who plays her lover Dillian.
Your father cannot understand your darkness.
Ellie Piercy, who plays her mother Galena.
Oh, do you see their faces?
Chipo Chung, who plays the narrator.
Once again, hell is reaching deep inside of her. I'll be right here, nice and close so I can speak without alerting the others.
As well as Melina Jurgens, who plays Senua. And Nick Bolton, who plays Senua's old friend Ruth.
It's an email for you, Senua. Your agent. They want you for Vikings.
Yeah! Early on in development, one of the service users described their flashback visions in vivid detail, and it wasn't quite like in the movies where you have lots of quick cuts. She described them as happening all around her, as if they were sort of unclear or out of focus, and she was present during them.
Who's that?
So based on these descriptions, Mark went away and did some tests in Unreal to see if he could come up with a style for the flashbacks that represented these ideas, and we were pretty happy with the results. After we shot everything, we picked one scene featuring Senua as a real-time CG character and Druth, played by Nick Bolton, as a green screen video to see if we could mix them and actually make them work.
It's a good habit to have in these dark times.
So our challenge was to integrate the green screen video of Druth into a scene that we had already captured featuring Melina.
Druth, is that you?
We did this by first blocking out the timings for both performances in an edit so that they matched.
Druth, is that you?
For my tales of the Northmen, they call me Druth.
Next, we had to make sure that the in-game camera matched exactly what we had shot during the live-action video shoot.
Kept you a vow.
To guide you in this life and the next.
The tricky part was then to apply post-processing effects so that the two characters felt like they were part of the same scene. So we applied the flashback post-processing effects first, making him go in and out of focus, blooming the image so that you wouldn't see any pixels, applying a light that affected both him and Senua in the same scene to help connect the two.
Who are you?
It's just a memory. Druth, is that you? Around you now.
The very next day, Game Informer actually turned up in the studio to do a feature on Hellblade. And so I watched them play the game and I was waiting for this scene to come up, and I was just hoping that they wouldn't notice that it was video.
I will tell you my stories of hell, if I may walk with you.
They played through the game, they played past the scene, they didn't say anything, they carried on playing. It was only about 30 minutes later when they reached another scene featuring Druth, this one that we hadn't post-processed and fixed, that they went, hang on a sec, is that video? It was only then that I felt like, wow, that was mission accomplished then.
Boom.
It's been a while since our last dev diary, as all of our focus has been on finishing the game. With the release of Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice now imminent, this will be our last dev diary before launch.
This is the first time that we're self-financing and self-publishing a major new game off our own backs, and our resources and budget was severely limited for Hellblade, but we didn't want anyone playing the game to feel like we've cut corners. And we knew it would be a fight to get this game done to the quality we wanted, but we didn't really quite anticipate just how hard it would be.
We've got a really good chance with this, and the platforms are really excited about it. I think we've got some cool things going on marketing-wise, so nothing's guaranteed, but certainly what we're aiming for with this is doable and it's realistic. So
a few months back we hit alpha, which meant that the game experience was complete but unpolished. Some areas were strong while others were weak, and we knew that the last few months would be crucial as we shifted our focus from content creation to improving the player experience.
But how can you make sure that the game is compelling and working as intended when you're so close to the project? A good rule of thumb is that you should never trust yourself. And so we invited people to the studio to play the game, people that we trust, who have a good eye for story, combat, gameplay and so forth.
It's not about the shock of a juxtaposed world. It's about a subtle shift. Yeah. And it feels like something in my brain has been shifted. Yeah.
The team's sole focus is to address this feedback week on week until we get to the very last day of the project.
This includes combat playtesting, where we test gameplay mechanics and difficulty with a mix of Ninja Theory staff from other projects, friends within the industry and expert players from the gaming community that we trust, people like Saw Dash. We took all of their feedback and added it to the mountain of things that we knew that we wanted to do to the game.
So it's not about getting 100 people to play test a game and then gathering massive amounts of data and stuff like that. This is a game about the experience, so it's focusing on the quality of the experience. You do what it takes to make the game better, regardless of what your plan or schedule says, and it requires intense focus and concentration from every team member. Nothing is off the cards. If we need new attacks or enemy behaviors, we make them. If we need to reshoot scenes, we get the actors back in, get back on set and shoot them. Or if we need to completely redesign a section of the game that's not working, we dive in and we do just that. Fear and desperation can set in, but you have to keep reminding yourself that there's no point finishing a game unless it's the game you intended to make.
At the same time, there's a massive optimization and debugging effort going on. Getting the game to run at a good frame rate, to fit in memory, and fixing bugs and crashes is an ongoing effort that takes the best part of a year, involving most of the same team members. On top of this, there's PlayStation 4 Pro and high-end PC support with things like 21:9, 4K across multiple graphics cards, and support for 20 languages with subtitles.
The list of areas you have to polish seems endless. Combat, traversal, puzzles, animation, cinematics, audio design, music, VFX, story. It just goes on, and it can feel overwhelming. But you have to keep your cool, focus on one area, polish it, move on to the next, focus, polish, and you just keep going until you just can't go anymore.
And with Hellblade, there was an additional factor that was essential for us to get right. For over 2 years, we've been collaborating with mental health professionals and people with lived experience of psychosis. We showed them a near-final version of the game to get their final feedback to ensure that we weren't misrepresenting them in the experience. We took all of their final feedback and added it to the list. It also inspired us to create a 25-minute documentary feature on our collaboration, which is included in the game.
The final step is to prepare your game for submission for PlayStation and for PC. Sony in particular have very strict technical guidelines that you have to adhere to, and we planned for 3 submissions. The first one bounced back due to technicalities, so we fixed these and submitted a second time. That again bounced back, and we had our third and final time to submit and pass, otherwise we would miss our ship date. Thankfully, we passed. We hope to prove that the industry still has room for developers like us who want to make smaller, more creatively driven high-end games in genres that AAA publishers have abandoned. But to do so, we have one more battle to fight, and that is to get the word out there. And so from here, we are counting on your support. Thank you.
Thanks for your support, guys. It's been a fun ride.